Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see second part, what if Deku was betrayed and became the multidimensional hero. Here is short summary. Izuku was preparing for his fight against Tomura Shigaraki when he was suddenly surrounded by his classmates and teacher, Shota Aizawa. He looked at them with confusion when his teacher cancelled out his quirk before Katsuki sent an explosion at him, as they started to fight him without him being capable of using his quirk. Feeling lost and betrayed, Izuku does his best to fight back but can't hold them off long enough to save himself. Momo lands a powerful blow to Izuku's chest, knocking him to the ground, before delivering several more strikes. Why are you doing this? Izuku asked, as the others glared at him. That was for being a traitor to us, they all say, as Izuku watched on in horror. Will he survive his problems? And wait, is that a portal appearing behind him? But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. After the defeat of Frost as well as his demise at the hands of Izuku, the young man had returned back to his hidden home within the planet Sadala Forest. He rebuilt his house within the hours of the day since it was broken down from the ground up, and all he really needed to do was just replace everything with what he already collected. Once he had finished the rebuilding process, he focused on training himself even more than he had originally. He wanted to be absolutely sure that this forest could become his new home as he prepared himself mentally for whatever could come for him in the future. He was getting more and more visitors from the Sadala police force as they looked to him for some training of their own in order to gain enough power to protect their planet without his interference. The young man was happy to train them all with the skills he had learned from Universe 7 as he trained each and every warrior in his off time whenever he moved about the forest. It literally got to the point of which the children of the people he trained asked to be trained like he was, as he couldn't say no to them. He felt like he was becoming an unofficial trainer to those who couldn't fight, but he couldn't also help but feel happier when he allowed others to learn from him in fighting. He wasn't the best, but that didn't mean that his skills and wisdom about fighting weren't sought out. He was in the middle of training a very particularly rowdy child as they wanted nothing more than to relax for the day and be lazy. Izuku had decided to show the child that if he wishes to train under him, he will not be lazy. So he used his skills as both a hero as well as a Saiyan to show the boy some manners. He chased the child across the entire training zone as he made his face look more demonic through painting his face earlier on that day. Through this training, Izuku would instill a fear of the boy becoming complacent when he couldn't defeat Izuku, who was wearing paint on his face. So when the boy started to train once more, Izuku was happy with the boy's increasing progress as he fixed positions some of the children were giving him. Completely unaware of the fact that he was being watched by two specific Thug Saiyan females as they watched him go. As Izuku settled inside his home after sending the children back to their parents in the main city, Izuku started making dinner for himself. He did notice a small energy making its way through his house and towards him, and as soon as he turned around, he was face to face with Caulifla as the woman was smiling at him. "Didn't know that you took on trainees for fighting," Caulifla said, as Izuku looked at her before moving to a different spot in his kitchen. "What do you want, Caulifla?" Izuku questioned, as he didn't want what happened the last time he was with her to happen once more. "The way you were training those Saiyan brats, they were very similar to how the Universe 7 Saiyans were fighting or training, as they say. Why are you teaching children to train like the Universe 7 Saiyans?" she asked, looking at his wide expressive eyes. "Maybe I want the next generation to become stronger than the last. Maybe not as strong as myself or you and Kaba and Kale, but enough to protect their planet in the future when all four of us aren't around." "You know," Izuku said, before looking at the Saiyan female. You're right about that. Not to mention that you seem to be really good with kids. How is that possible?" she asked, as she moved closer to him. "I thought all Saiyan males were very dismissive of their children from Universe 7. she asked, as she leaned over towards him. "That is the Universe 7 Saiyans who are like that. My quirk just used some biology from them in order to transform my body into one of them so that I could survive the wounds I had received from the world I originate from," Izuku said, as he continued to make his food. The two remained in silence before another presence was noticed by both of them nearing the house. And once the two exited the home, they found Kaba coming towards the two of them, but once he saw Caulifla he smiled at her and Izuku standing next to one another. "So, I guess I came here at a bad time?" he asked, as Izuku blushed and looked away. "We're not together," he said, stuttering. "Yeah, he seems like he would pass out from asking me out anyway," Caulifla said, smirking at Izuku. "Well anyway, I just came here to give my thanks for helping us with the frost situation a few weeks ago, Izuku. Your power was very much needed for that fight, and I will call you again if the enemy who comes up is much more powerful than me or my allies in the police," Kaba said, as Izuku nodded. "Make sure to have your fights with other races of villains not more powerful than yourself too often. I would like to live in peace on your planet, Kaba-san," Izuku said, as Kaba nodded, smiling at the boy taking off towards the city. Moving back into his home after Kaba left, Izuku looked at the female Saiyan who was standing near him as he let out a sigh. "What do you really want, Caulifla?" Izuku asked, as she smiled at him. "I want another session with you again soon. Kale does as well. We don't know why you give us the best sessions we've ever had in our lives since we figured it out with you. But we would like to have again," Caulifla said, as Izuku felt something akin to glass breaking inside his brain. Coughing up some spittle, he looked at her with confusion but most importantly embarrassment as he stared at her with a massive blush on his face. "Why would you come back to me? I don't belong on this planet of Saiyans?" Izuku said, as Caulifla smiled at him. "Well, it's because you are both of our first times, and we would rather stay with someone whose own personality clashes perfectly well with our own," Caulifla said, as Izuku thought about why Saiyans prefer high-willed people. "Does your race prefer to mate with other races that are highly willed?" Izuku asked, as Caulifla thought about it. "Well, if they can land a hit on me, that means that I like 'em," Caulifla said, as she smiled at Izuku. "Well, I guess that works, but I don't understand why you and Kale like me specifically. I'm more of a submissive person when it comes to a personality relating to romance and whatever," Izuku said, as Caulifla said something that he wasn't expecting. "I wasn't referring to you romantically that I liked you for. I like your high will against foes. It's your determination against an enemy that you want to defeat faster than anything else that I like about you. You're not about monologuing to your enemy like a stereotypical hero or villain themselves. You prefer to end the fight before it can begin, and I like your determination to do so," Caulifla said, as Izuku thought about it. "What about Kale? What does she like about me?" Izuku asked, as Caulifla thought about what Kale had told her previously. "Well, I guess she likes how submissive you are compared to other Saiyans. She's come across many Saiyans who were too dominant in the relationship and likes how you are submissive. She's the complete opposite when it comes to our race's customs of finding high-willed women to mate with," Caulifla said, as Izuku sat down as he finished cooking dinner. Caulifla took a plate for herself, since Izuku made so much as they talked for the remainder of the night about things to prepare for in the future. Izuku didn't like how both girls were already becoming really close to him, but he couldn't find it within himself to deny the love that they were very clearly showing to him. So when he was in the middle of training on an off day from training the next generation, he was in his training gym when he heard movement from the sky behind him. As soon as he turned around, he found 3 figures, 2 were Caulifla and Kale, and the last one was someone that Izuku didn't know. "Who are you, sir?" Izuku asked, the much taller man. "I am the King of Sadala, otherwise known as King Dastran. I would like to thank you for saving my planet from the curse that was Frost. He was a very highly ranked criminal within our universe, and with his demise we were able to take away all his money as well as other things from him that belonged to his army. For that, I came here with a portion of the money as well as artifacts he had collected as a peace offering to you," Dastran said, as Izuku picked up the artifacts. Not that I wouldn't take a peace offering, but why are you doing this really?" Izuku asked, as Dastran looked at him with a humble look. "I wanted nothing more than to earn your trust with an offering of peace between both of us. You are an incredibly powerful being, that I cannot ever hope to defeat. So my only chance as king is to make sure that you are an ally to my planet instead of a future enemy. Dastron said, as Izuku thought about it before shrugging. I guess I can become an ally to you. But don't expect me to start paying taxes. Izuku said, as Dastron laughed. Don't worry, young man, nobody pays taxes here. We just live life to the fullest. The king said, before taking off, leaving the trio alone near Izuku's house. Well, are you just going to stand there and continue giving us some eye candy, or are you going to do something about us? Caulifla asked, as Izuku looked at both girls. He noticed that they were not wearing anything over their bikinis that they were wearing. Sure, come on. Izuku said, as he blushed from how well the bikinis suited both girls. Izuku was in his kitchen as the vestiges were conversing in the realm of One for all about their future endeavors. The young man had been making some food for himself since he wanted to go out on an adventure within the universe. At least to make sure that Sadala doesn't have any potential threats that could cause harm to the planet itself in the future. As the young man finished getting his breakfast ready, he heard a knock at the front door of his home within the Sadala forest and walked to the door with a deadpan expression on his face. Opening the door, he was met with Caulifla and Kale, as one was showing a smile, and the other was sweat dropping. What can I do for you two today, Caulifla? Izuku asked, with a deadpan expression. Word on the street is that you plan on leaving planet Sadala in search of adventure. I want to come with you, Caulifla said, smirking at him. I would rather you not come with me, Izuku bluntly said, slamming the door in her face. Sitting down at his table, he started to eat his breakfast when the door slammed open as Caulifla and Kale entered, the second girl closing the door softly. What the hell? When a girl says that they want to go out on an adventure with you, you don't just slam the door in their face after saying no. Caulifla complained. I can and I did. Do you have any idea how much high maintenance you are within this place? Izuku asked, exasperatedly. What in the hell are you talking about, you damn broccoli? Caulifla called out, growling. What I mean, Caulifla, you are too much of a distraction for me if we were to go out on an adventure in the universe. Izuku said. Caulifla stared at Izuku for a moment before growling audibly and reaching over the table and grabbing his shirt by the collar and glaring in his eyes. You will be bringing me and Kale with you on this trip around the universe, whether you like it or not. Or else, Caulifla said, as Izuku smirked at her. Or else what? You going to have with me again? Izuku questioned as the girl blushed slightly. And no, I will fight you in order to join you on this journey around the universe. If I win, you will allow me and Kale to join your adventures. Caulifla said, as Izuku thought about his answer. What about if I win? Izuku asked, as Caulifla stared at him. What do you mean, you won't win against me? Caulifla said, angrily. Caulifla, I fought Jiren back in the Tournament of Power. And yes, I may not be as strong as him physically, but in terms of mentality I was strong enough to provide enough power to defeat him in the end. What makes you think that you can defeat my new form? Izuku asked, as the girl glared at him. Well, me and Kale will fuse. Then we will see if you can defeat us then. Caulifla said, as Kale looked at her. Why am I being dragged into this? She asked, timidly. I don't know, but if she wants to fight my new form with your added power, so be it. Meet me in the backyard, I got a small machine that will allow us to train. Izuku said, standing up. Inside the small training room, the trio stared at how massive the inside space was as Caulifla stared at Izuku in concern. Are we safe in here? Not that I'm scared, but I would rather be able to move around when we are in here. Caulifla said, as Izuku smiled. This space is allowing those of us within its realm to train for multiple days without time passing by faster outside. This is where I train myself after a long day of boredom. Izuku said, as he started to stretch his body. Taking off his shirt, he willingly showed off his chiseled chest as well as his very muscular torso, both girls liking what they were seeing. As soon as Izuku was prepared for the training to begin, he and Caulifla had moved around the small void of space before moving faster than the eye could see. Clashing in the middle of the space with Kale watching from the sidelines, a shockwave had blasted out from all sides as the two had moved about the place. Punches and kicks were thrown and countered as the two Saiyans had launched attacks at the other as they struggled to dodge the other's plans of attack. As soon as the two moved back from their clashes, Caulifla stretched her body out a bit before transforming into a Super Saiyan as she stared at Izuku. "Come on, let's move on to the next level," Caulifla said, as Izuku activated his quirk. Green electricity moved about his skin and body as small veins of red lines moved from head to toe, catching the two Saiyan females' attention quickly. "Whoa, what is that?" Caulifla asked, as Izuku chuckled. "This is my power, before I was a Saiyan. This power is called One for All. My mentor, Master, gave it to me for completing a mission of cleaning a beach as training to prepare myself for holding its power. For the longest time I hadn't been able to work out the strength and other quirks that were given to me, but that doesn't matter anymore. With this I can be as strong as you are. Let's get this started," Izuku said, as he neutrally watched her movements. Caulifla flew towards him as Izuku did the same, with the addition of float as the two clashed in the air. Caulifla was seemingly unaffected with the powerful strikes that Izuku was landing on her Super Saiyan form as the two disappeared from view and reappeared around the place, making clashing shockwaves. The two moved faster as they tried to get the upper hand on one another. Izuku went on the attack as he sent Black Whip in order to restrain Caulifla, as well as using Smokescreen in order to cover his tracks. It worked like a charm when he ensnared Caulifla within the whip tendrils as she struggled to get free of them. "When I use this specific quirk, it allows me to catch any opponent. You won't be able to escape from them," Izuku said, pulling her in and sending out a right hook to her face. As he pushed her away and pulled her back multiple times, sending punch and kick to her, Caulifla eventually had enough and transformed into Super Saiyan 2 as she broke free of the tendrils. "Well, that isn't fun," Izuku pouted as Caulifla glared at him. "I couldn't escape from the tendrils. You just made them tighter, and I think my tit hurts now," Caulifla grumbled before rubbing the underside of her left beak. "Well, I guess I should go Super Saiyan now," Izuku said, as Caulifla stared at him. Getting into a fighting stance, the woman had watched as Izuku set his legs apart from one another as he gathered power into his body. "HRRRRRRRAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA blackish-green color to a lime-green color as it stood up much more spiked than normal. His musculature had increased slightly as his aura had suddenly disappeared, his body having absorbed it into himself. Getting into a fighting stance, Izuku activated his quirk again as he smiled at Caulifla as Black Whip had gathered around his body once more. Surprisingly this time, instead of sending it out towards Caulifla, Izuku had fused the quirk into his body as well as skin as he turned his Super Saiyan transformation into a Black Whip Super Saiyan form. As soon as his new look was shown to Caulifla and Kale, the two watched as Izuku's look went from a normal and calm Super Saiyan form to looking slightly berserk. His face was covered with a small black mask covering his lower mouth as well as his cheeks and moved around his eyes. There were strands of Black Whip covering the bicep and triceps of the boy's arms and the Black Whips covered his legs giving him an animalistic look. He then launched towards Caulifla as the woman flew towards him at full power, knowing to not take him lightly. Clashing in the middle of the room once more, Caulifla growled as the two moved about the place sending well-timed punches and kicks towards one another. Izuku sent a kick that had caught Caulifla off guard since he hadn't used it earlier as he swept her feet out from under her and then sent a kick towards her abdomen, which in turn sent her ragdolling down the void area. Standing back up, she was grabbed again by the Black Whips as she stared at Izuku as he flew towards her at high speeds. Breaking free of the whips, she flew towards Izuku as well as they threw their punches at one another creating a new shockwave stronger than the previous ones. As soon as Izuku increased his speed slightly, Caulifla couldn't keep up anymore as Izuku disappeared around her guard and sent her flying through the air and appearing where she was flung to and sending her elsewhere. It all ended when Izuku appeared above her and did a double sledgehammer strike on her stomach sending her straight to the floor. D-damn, how are you this strong? Why you didn't even transform into S Super Saiyan 2? Caulifla struggled out, as Kale gave a small water bottle to her. Thanks Kale, the girl said, as she drank some water. That was a good fight, but you are just throwing your punches and hoping that they strike. You're a street brawler, and you are predictable in a fight. Izuku said, as Kale stared at him. We were taught to fight like that since we were very young. Kale said, slightly glaring at Izuku. Which is why I am the one breaking apart your fighting styles. If I was a villain, I would have transformed into my most powerful form and killed you both without hesitation. Izuku said, as Kale glared at him harder. What do we need to do in order to make up for that? Caulifla asked, as Izuku looked at her now. Well, you need to learn some form of martial arts. I learned what I know from Gohan and Piccolo from Universe 7 when I appeared in their universe one day. Izuku said, as he thought back to when he first appeared in Universe 7. Wait, how did you appear in Universe 7? I thought you were a member of their team. Caulifla asked, as Izuku smiled at her. Well, I never was a part of their universe in the first place, I come from a different timeline of Universe 6. Izuku said, as Caulifla looked at him weirdly. Planet Earth, before it destroyed itself in this timeline. It had somehow gained the ability to have its inhabitants to wield abilities that were once thought. Supernatural, Izuku said, as Kale and Caulifla listened in on the story. When I was first born, around 80% of the human population of Earth had abilities that we called quirks. But before that, around 200 years before that, there was nobody who had those abilities that I have currently. Izuku said, activating One for All, feeling its warmth throughout his body. So were you born with One for All? Kale asked, as Izuku shook his head. Without One for All, I would be quirkless, Izuku said, as Caulifla stared at him in wonder. What happened to get that quirk? She asked, as Izuku looked at the sky. Well, I had decided to recklessly enter a villain fight when I noticed someone who used to be a bully to me about to die. And since the heroes who were there at the time, that's a job by the way, weren't doing anything to help. I ran in to save who I thought at the time was a close friend. I threw my backpack at the villain who held him in his grasp, and one of my notebooks inside had hit the villain's eyes. It allowed me enough time to move some of the slime off of the hostages' face so that they could get a much-needed breath of air. Izuku said, as Caulifla gave a hurry-up gesture. Earlier that day, I had been told that I couldn't become a hero without a quirk. It was the one thing, when I was younger growing up, that I had wanted to do, and be acknowledged to be able to do. But nobody even believed that I could do it. It got to the point where I myself didn't believe in my own ability to do it as well, and I never trained my body for it. But I did train my brain for it, Izuku said, as he thought about the meeting with All Might. So, are you going to get to the point? Caulifla asked, as Kale smacked Caulifla's head. What the hell, Kale? Caulifla growled out, as Kale glared at her. Let him finish, sister, Kale said, as Caulifla grumbled to herself. It wasn't until later that very evening that I met with the man who had broken down my dreams harshly. And he made sure to tell me that I could become a hero. And it was then that he offered me his power, the power that I wield now. When I first heard him tell me that he could pass on his power to someone else. I may have mumbled out some obscenities about how it would be impossible to do. Izuku said, chuckling, as Izuku told the rest of the story of how he helped clean a beach as well as gained the power of One for All, with All Might's advice of how to use the power for the first time. The girls had laughed at that last part, and he told the two about everything that had happened to where he appeared in Universe 7. While those bitches better be glad that you don't wish to seek revenge, I know that I would personally head to that planet in order to blow it up for being such assholes to me. Caulifla said, as Kale patted Izuku's arm. Looking at the girl, she had rubbed her arm for a moment before giving him a small hug. It was quick and small, but Izuku appreciated it. I am sorry for what you had to go through up until arriving in our sister universe. Kale said, as Izuku patted the girl's head. It's fine, I got to meet my new masters through my class betraying me. Not to mention that I got to meet you both through my choices leading up to now, so I got to say that I lucked out on this. Izuku said, as Kale and Caulifla blushed slightly. Standing up from the ground, Izuku, Caulifla and Kale had walked out of the training area as they were now walking towards his home. If you all want, you can sleep on my bed tonight. I would like to sleep on the couch anyway, Izuku said, sitting on the couch. As the two girls retreated to his bedroom and closed the door, Izuku pulled out a communicator with the Sadala Defense Force. "This is Kaba, what can I do for you?" The familiar voice of Kaba asked. "Kaba, do you think you can get me a spaceship that can traverse the entirety of Universe 6 and some money to pay for my trip?" Izuku asked, as Kaba sat up in his office. "What do you need that for?" Kaba questioned, confused. "I want to go out on an adventure within Universe 6 and find out if there is anything I need to be worried about out there. You never know when there might be a new opponent who comes for planet Sadala," Izuku said, as Kaba gave a grunt of confirmation. "Well, we have a Destructor-class spaceship that is being called in for reconstruction. Do you want to repurpose that as a personal ship to move about the universe?" Kaba asked, as Izuku gave a gruff affirmation. "Well then, we will have it prepared for you within 2 weeks. It's undergoing maintenance at the moment," Kaba said, as Izuku thanked him for his assistance. "Not a problem, Izuku. Always glad to help," Kaba said, before ending the call. Once Izuku laid back on the couch, he never noticed two girls looking down at him from behind the couch with arms reaching out for him, their eyes glowing pink as they reached for his soon-to-be unconscious body. The next morning Izuku, Caulifla and Kale had entered the massive ship that was provided by Kaba as well as the king. They were preparing for their journey when someone came up to them outside of the ship. "Hey Izuku, I wanted to see you guys off." Kaba's voice came out from below. Izuku poked his head out of the ship before jumping down to the young Saiyan warrior. "What's up?" Izuku asked, as soon as he touched down. "Just wanted to say thanks for what you did against Frost. Where will you be exploring within the universe?" Kaba asked, as Izuku showed a map of certain planet that he wanted to explore. "Well, these planets are inhabited by some populace who are very receptive to those who come from the stars. I would certainly hope that your time within our universe is fun. Wouldn't want you to be running into some bad individuals," Kaba said, as Izuku nodded. The two would converse with one another until Caulifla called out to Izuku as she said that the ship was prepared to leave the planet so they could head out on their adventure. Bidding farewell to Kaba, Izuku climbed into the ship as he prepared for his new adventure within the unknown universe. Once the ship took off into the cosmos, Izuku looked back at the planet that he was living on for the last few months of his life. Looking at the multicolored planet in awe, he turned away and looked to the incoming many planets nearby as he took the reins of the ship and flew towards their next destination. Within the first few hours, Izuku, Caulifla and Kale had been training with one another as they had been keeping one another occupied with the incoming boredom. And as the trio were training in their base forms, they had passed by many planets as they looked at each one in awe as well as trepidation. He kept to himself though as he spent time with Caulifla and Kale trying to keep their minds off of the whole boredom of moving towards the first planet in the solar system they were living within. The planet in question, Namek. It had been a few days since leaving planet Sadala with Izuku, Caulifla and Kale looking at the massive planet of Namek. It was a completely different contrast to the Universe 7 version of things that Izuku heard about from Piccolo and Gohan. This planet was blue in color as well as green on the outer layer of the planet's magnetic field, and he couldn't help but think about all the techniques he would learn from this planet in specifics. Landing the ship near a village nearby, Izuku and the girls had exited the ship and took deep breaths of the planet's air. Moving towards the nearest village, the trio had kept a low profile as they were looking for certain individuals who had been inside the Tournament of Power. As they explored around the planet, they saw many Namekian tribes moving about the place and collecting some water and fish from nearby rivers. They also collected some seaweed from the sea floor as they sold them in their small markets within their village. As soon as the trio stopped within the small village, the Namekians had smiled at them with a calming presence within them all. "What brings you to our lovely planet?" a very old voice asked, from behind the group. Turning around, Izuku was shown a very short, but pudgy old Namekian who was looking at them with a small smile on his face. "We came here to visit some Namekians who were a part of the Tournament of Power." "Are they nearby?" Izuku asked, as the old Namekian smiled even more. "Ah, you must be talking about Sayonal and Polina. They are the guardians of our Grand Elder Murik. Come, they are this way," the old Namekian said, as the trio followed not far behind. Moving through the vast expanse of Namek, Izuku took in the peaceful planet as he smiled with a sad but forlorn expression over his face. "Something troubles you so?" the elder asked, as Izuku looked at him. "Not sure what gender Namekians can be, but just something from my past came up. I just wish I could have lived on a planet in my own world. Without any trouble on the horizon," Izuku said, as the elder nodded. "Many races around the universe come by to use our Dragon Balls, but we only inform them that certain wishes cannot be given. Such as making oneself the strongest in the universe, immortality, and many others." Not much longer after the group had arrived at the Grand Elder's home, the Elder Namek had knocked on the door only for it to be opened by Sayonal. "What brings you here, Derek?" Sayonal asked, as Derek smiled. "Some Saiyans from planet Sadala had arrived in search of both you and Polina," Derek said, as Sayonal looked behind him. "What brings you Saiyans to our home planet?" Sayonal asked, as the trio of Saiyans Namek were alone behind the Grand Elder's home. "I wanted to explore the vast expansive universe. But Caulifla and Kale wished to come with me, so I asked if we could visit this planet. I had heard of Namek from Piccolo of Universe 7. He said that the planet was peaceful as well as very helpful to those who entered their airspace," Izuku said, as Sayonal smirked. "Well, that Piccolo was right. We here on planet Namek help those in need in terms of getting food, water as well as many other items that can be sold on other planets for high price. We help other races out of the kindness of our heart, but we can also reject those who don't have good hearts," Sayonal said, as he stared into Izuku's eyes. "What do they wish to use the Dragon Balls for?" Another voice called out, and behind the wall was Polina, the Namekian who had been the smarter of the two in the tournament. "Hello Polina, long time no see," Caulifla said, as the Namekian stared at her. "It's been a rough few months, but nothing too bad. What are you Saiyans doing on our home planet?" Polina asked, as the trio went over their reasons. "You don't wish to use the Dragon Balls?" Sayonal questioned with a stern look. "I didn't even know you guys had Dragon Balls until our conversation earlier," Izuku said, as Sayonal glared at him harder. "Surely you were told about the Namekian Dragon Balls from Universe 7. Sayonal said, as Izuku nodded. "I was, but I didn't think your universe would have them as well. Considering you both are sister universes, I thought that if one had them the other wouldn't," Izuku said, before going on a muttering spree. Sayonal and Polina watched as Izuku devolved into a muttering spree as they were starting to get confused and concerned for the young Saiyan. "Are you sure that he is a Saiyan?" Polina asked, with a sweat drop. "Yup, he even defeated Frost when he attacked Sadala with an entire army of pirates," Caulifla said before walking over to the muttering Izuku and slapping on the backside of his head. "Stop scaring the Nameks," she yelled as Izuku rubbed the back of his head with an apology. "Sorry, I tend to just mutter sometimes," Izuku said, as Sayonal and Polina smiled. "Don't worry, those of you who have brains that clutter things inside too much tend to mutter them out," Sayonal said, as Izuku stood up to prepare to leave the planet. "Well, I guess I could leave now. We probably used up enough time from your days protecting your Grand Elder," Izuku said, stretching his body. Caulifla and Kale watched as Izuku was preparing to leave when everyone heard a very old voice coming from inside the building. "Midoriya Izuku, a young human from another plane of existence. Come inside, I wish to see you," the voice called out, as Izuku stopped in his tracks. Turning around to the opening inside the home, he looked over to the Namekians who were just as confused as they nodded at him. Entering the small entrance, Izuku looked around the place for the Grand Elder of Murik, and he only saw him when he entered a large room storing a massive Namekian. "Hello there, young man, I had felt your power from outside and got curious," the old Namekian said, as he leaned over to see him. Don't worry sir, I was about to leave your planet in peace," Izuku said, as Murik stared at him for a moment. "Would you like to do this old Namek a favor?" Murik questioned. "What is it?" Izuku asked, as Murik coughed a little. "I have been sensing a massive power erupt from this universe. They are a danger to all life within the known universe. I wish for you to attempt and defeat them and prevent this power from damaging the entire universe. After that is done, I will give you a gift for your troubles," Murik said, as Izuku stared at the Namek with a smile. Don't need a present or gift for helping those in danger. Who is the person who needs to be defeated? Izuku asked, as Murek gained a serious expression. Their name is unknown to me, but their power is in the higher echelons of gods. What makes them dangerous is their high potential for magic. Their magic is dangerous for those who cannot overpower the magic of these creatures. I pray that you can defeat them even with their magic, only then will you be able to live your life within this universe in peace. Murek said, as Izuku held out a hand. I will do everything I can in order to stop this rising threat, I can only hope that I am strong enough to do it. Izuku said, as Murek pushed out a hand to shake. Equals 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 equals. Once their hands had met and shook, on the other side of the universe a group of magicians had looked off into the distance and growled audibly. This group were covered in shadows, their ears the only thing able to be seen other than the colors of their eyes. Long ears that ended in points, as well as pink in color, the eyes of each one multitude of different colors. Ranging from red, blue and yellow to brown, violet and green. The most concerning though is the brownish-orange color from one of them, as he was the tallest of them all. Standing at a whopping 50 feet tall, he was muscular underneath the cloak he wore as he glared out at the universe of stars. So, it seems that Elder Murek is sending someone powerful enough to stop us. So be it. The next fighters he sends will die much like the rest. The voice said, as we look behind the group is a multitude of Namekians, Saiyans, and many other unknown races laid on the ground. There was even a dead Kai on the ground behind them as the leader laughed maniacally. Izuku and Ko were leaving the planet of Namek. They had a new location to head off to, considering the planet itself had harbored something that was pure good. Izuku didn't know who this was, but if they could recruit them in order to join their cause to protect the universe, then he would take any ally. Flying through space, Izuku kept an eye out for the planet he was searching for, and in the background, he heard Caulifla and Kale training with one another. Careful with how you train in here, I don't need you both destroying the ship and leaving us stranded in space. Izuku said, as both girls lowered their power levels in order to train much safer. Letting out a sigh, Izuku continued looking at the map. He had been looking at a certain planet that had been bugging him for the last few hours. Looking at the planet, we find out that it was, surprisingly, Earth. It seemed as though that this planet in particular was the thing that was harboring the pure good life form of this Majin Buu creature he had heard about from Murek. The old Namek had informed Izuku about the creature's desire to protect all life within the known universe and would do anything to protect Earth in particular. So as they closed in on the planet, Izuku made sure to send out a burst of power so that Buu could sense his power. And with his power burst, he let out his true feelings out through it. It had a feeling of calm and serenity. And with their ship landing on the ground of a nearby city, Izuku stepped out of the ship and looked at the city in confusion. Looking off in the distance, he found that something was moving closer and closer as their power was shown off massively. It seems this Majin Buu is much more powerful than Elder Murek stated. I can't wait to see if he will be willing to help us. Izuku thought to himself as he stood on the ground near the ship. The Saiyan females inside the ship were unconscious from knocking the other out during their training, so they never sensed Buu's arrival. Standing on a random rock face, a small blue blob of a person noticed a spike in power before looking to the sky. She glared at the ship as it landed nearby. But what confused her was the fact that this power that was let out in a burst was calm, serene, almost as if it didn't wish to fight with her. So flying off towards the incoming ship, she made sure that she would keep whoever this was away from her planet. The food here belonged to her and Champa, not some outer space garbage. Arriving at the ship, she was very surprised to find that a green curly-haired young man was standing outside of the ship looking in her direction. And as she landed in front of him, he seemed to smile even more, causing her to lower her guard a little. He seemed friendly, at least, better compared to some of those other evil bastards that tried to take over the planet. Who are you? Why have you come here? She asked, as the young man stared at her in confusion. I've come here for some help. Elder Murek of planet Namek sent me here. The young man said, as he stepped forwards and bowed. My name is Midoriya Izuku, and I hail from the planet Sadala. Where all the Saiyans live, I came out to explore the universe and have some fun. Before hearing about a threat that could cause the whole universe to disappear, Izuku said, as he stood back up looking at her. Well, my name is Majin Buu, and what are your reasons for seeking me out? She asked, introducing herself. I am looking for someone who would be willing to protect the universe and all life that is put in danger from this threat. Between you and me, I don't think I am strong enough to face this threat alone. Izuku said, as Majin Buu stared at him for a moment. What is in it for me if I join you? She asked, as Izuku stared at her for a moment. Well, adventure. I don't have anything that would suit your fancy, Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment. What foods did you bring? She asked, as Izuku looked at her in confusion. I only brought enough food that would last us until we finished our journey across the universe. But it would only last a few weeks at best. Izuku said, as Majin Buu growled. I asked what kinds of food you brought with you. He said, pointing at him with a blast ready to kill. Izuku raised his hands in the air as he spoke towards the seemingly angered Majin Buu. We have a lot of meat, some snacks as well as juice, Izuku asked, at the last part as Majin Buu continued to glare at him. Will you be returning to Earth anytime soon? Majin Buu asked, as Izuku shook his head. Not unless I have to. I have a home on planet Sadala, I just want to live out the rest of my life in peace. And I wanted one last adventure before having that, Izuku said, as Buu nodded. Your words ring true. I can tell if one is lying. It is how I killed all my foes who wished harm on Earth. This planet is off limits to those who wish to take it over. It is under my jurisdiction to protect, and those who try and defeat me will get no mercy. Buu said, as Izuku nodded. So, do we have an agreement? Izuku asked as Buu thought about it. Who else is with you on this journey? It can't seriously be you alone. Buu said, as she sensed two others inside the ship. You must be sensing Caulifla and Kale. They were training before I came here to seek you out. They got really into their training, Izuku said, chuckling. I cannot blame them, they are really Saiyans. You lot are just a race who live for the thrill of a fight and nothing more, you though aren't like them, Buu said, poking Izuku's chest. I don't know what you mean, Izuku asked, as Buu pushed him into the wall of his ship. You are naturally kinder than most, I can sense it from the aura you secrete beneath your skin. Your eyes are a lot wider than most Saiyans I know about, and from what I heard from some Saiyans who came here for a break from their patrol around the galaxy, they told me rumors about how you fight only after being attacked. Buu said, as she licked her lips. Why are you licking your lips? Izuku asked, worried. Do you have a mate of your own? She asked, causing Izuku to stare at her in shock. Well, I don't consider them my mates, but the two insides are kind of similar to that, Izuku said, as Majin Buu sighed in exasperation. Damn it, why can't I get a mate already? Buu whined as Izuku stared at her in confusion. What's wrong? Izuku asked, worried. It's always the good ones who have a mate of their own. I'm utterly hopeless, Buu whined as she kicked her feet on the ground like a toddler throwing a tantrum. Izuku's eyes twitches as he thinks about what to do about Majin Buu, and Izuku just doesn't know what to do before he hears Caulifla's voice. Well, how about we share him? She called out, causing Buu to stop her tantrum. You mean it? She called out, running to Caulifla. As Caulifla smiled at the small Buu, she looked over at Izuku with a smirk on her face. A knowing one that Izuku sighed at. I guess we could bring you along, so long as you don't break anything within the ship, Izuku said, as Majin Buu jumped on him, beeping his cheek a lot. I can't wait to go on an adventure. Oh, I have just got to tell Bora, she said, flying off towards the city. Who is Bora? Izuku asked, as Caulifla smirked. I don't know, but who was that? I didn't know that there were pink humans on Earth, Caulifla said, as Izuku shook his head. That wasn't a human. That was Majin Buu, and apparently, She is the good version of Universe 7's Majin Buu who was evil. Not to mention this one was really worked up, Izuku said, thinking his words through. Oh, don't worry about her Izuku, she will be fine. I wonder what kind of action she might give you though. Caulifla said, offhandedly only to be smacked by Kale. Bad sister, no horny. She said, with a small fly swatter. Izuku continued to talk to Buu as she conversed with him as the two of them walked around the nearby city. They had been talking to one another since Caulifla had wanted to get a bite to eat from the humans of the planet. And with both her and Kale distracted with their consumption of food of the planet, Buu had brought Izuku over to the planet's version of Kami's lookout. But this Kami looked more human. He was a very old man as he looked eerily similar to Master Roshi from what Izuku had seen very little of the diminutive old man. Hello there Buu, have you finally found yourself a mate? The old man asked, as Izuku blushed and looked away as Buu nodded. I have Roshi-sama, I can't believe that all those talks with me had finally allowed me to find my potential mate. And to think he arrived in Universe 7 first. I'm just glad that I was the third girl to find him. Buu said, excitedly as Roshi smiled. Well, at least someone is happy. You treat her all right, young man. All right, Roshi asked, with a protective glint in his eye. Roshi, I thought you lived in Universe 7. Izuku asked, as the old codger just chuckled. In this universe I am the guardian of the earth, but I am not the Roshi you seem to know about. Roshi said, as Izuku nodded before looking to Buu. So, Buu, what are we doing here exactly? Izuku asked, as Buu gained an excited glint in her eye. Oh, dearie me, I forgot to inform you. I wanted to fight someone when I first saw you, thinking you were a threat to my planet. So in order to see how strong you are, I wanted to have a spar in the hyperbolic time slammer. She said, as Roshi just glared at the diminutive pink girl. Hyperbolic time chamber, Roshi corrected as Izuku nodded. So you wanted to spar with me? How far are you willing to go? Izuku asked, since he didn't think Buu knew about God Ki. Go as hard as you can, I can take it. And whatever my body can't handle, I can just regenerate from a singular cell if it survives. Buu said, offhandedly. Do you know about God Ki? Izuku asked, as Roshi spoke up. If you were referring to Champa coming here every other week and having Buu train with Vados, then yes she does. She just has issues in learning how to utilize her own God Ki. Roshi said, as Izuku nodded. Yosh, let's head in and I can teach you how to activate it. Izuku said, as he pulled Buu by the arm into the room. The Majin looking at his hand with a violet blush on her cheeks. Inside the time chamber, Izuku stretched his body as he stared at Buu as she copied his movements. The two stared at one another as Izuku sat on the ground greatly perplexing the Majin as he stared at her with a serious expression. If we are going to fight, I would like to see how powerful you were in terms of ki control. Izuku started as the Majin nodded and powered up. Hyaaaaaaaaa. Majin Buu screamed as her aura and ki exploded outwards. The power of her aura alone had caused some of the ground beneath them to break apart as they blasted past Izuku, who had in the moment before she powered up placed a small barrier around himself to keep himself from being smacked in the face with rubble. As soon as Buu had finished her powering up, Izuku stood up from his spot as he looked at her incredibly beautiful pink aura that flowed around her body. It also lifted some of her clothes around her body as it gave him a good look at her midriff. She was definitely well muscled as she stood in front of Izuku who was just slightly taller than she was. He moved around her as he poked at her aura with a curious glint in his eyes as he stopped moving around her before he powered himself up. And the effect was immediate. Buu was pushed back through the ground, but there was something different from their two auras, as she looked closer at Izuku. His aura wasn't being shown, it was as if it was deep within his body letting an intimidating shadow loom over his head. It was really terrifying now that Buu thought about it as she slightly took a step back, but she did notice that this key signature was very different from when he didn't have it activated. Was that you using this, God Ki? Buu asked, receiving a nod. How can I activate my godly power? She asked, as Izuku sat in front of her. It's exactly simple really, just let your aura be consumed by your body. Izuku said, as Boo stared at him confused. What? She asked, with a dumbfounded expression. Here, when I let my aura blast out of my body it leaks my power and I'm no longer at my max power. But if I keep the aura within, it will allow me to stay at full power, but at the expense of my stamina since I need to use that in order to keep up my full power. Izuku said, as Boo nodded and thought about hiding her aura. Boo would sigh as she felt her aura simply fade into her body as she felt all her leaked power return to her slowly since she wasn't using it. There we go, now all you need to do is hold this for a day within this place. And once that is done, we will spar with one another. Izuku said, as he sat not far away from Boo. Wait, how long do I have to do this? Boo asked, comedically with tears falling from her eyes. Just a few hours within here or a day outside, right? Well, all you need to do is sit and meditate for a few hours and you will be ready for that spar. Izuku said, sitting on the ground with a calm expression over his face. As the two sat there, Boo watched as Izuku's body moved as he took in deep breaths within the time chamber. It was a very inhospitable environment with the different changes in weather as well as other factors within the place. But with him sitting on the ground meditating as if nothing was happening, caused her to bring her best in order to keep her ki held within her body. And by the time Izuku had seemingly woken up from his meditation-induced slumber, he watched as Boo was looking at her arms in shock as well as curiosity. I see that you've managed to last long enough to keep your ki within your body. Now we can spar, Izuku said, entering a combat stance. Boo did the same as she smirked at Izuku, and within moments the two were flying towards one another. Boo though did notice how Izuku wasn't using ki in order to move himself through the air, it was as if there was another power at play here. She got her answer when she barely noticed Izuku's change in speed as he appeared in front of her within milliseconds as she stared at his fist in shock as he simply said 4 words. Second gear, shift now, Izuku muttered as Boo was sent flying into the distance. And once he moved faster than the eye could predict, Boo found herself staring at those freckles on his cheeks once again before shaking her head. Increasing her power once again, she had finally managed to keep up with his speed as they both clashed fists in the middle of the air creating a shockwave. That's not fair. You have a power that doesn't belong to ki. I was taken completely off guard by that. Boo complained as she sent a kick that was blocked by a black whip that came out of Izuku's arm. Completely bewildered by Izuku's secondary ability for the moment, it allowed the boy to land a kick to her face sending her out of her bewilderment as she noticed something very off. Why doesn't this hurt? She thought before she was sent flying. Boo bounced off the ground a bit before jumping up to her feet as she found Izuku now floating in the air without using ki again. She was getting seriously tired of all these tricks that Izuku was doing and just went full power and attacked Izuku with a flurry of attacks. They were precise as well coordinated as each strike came closer and closer to his face and solar plexus. Eventually she landed a hit on Izuku as he didn't even flinch from the attack as he sent a punch to her stomach causing her to feel her back release some air from his attack. Stepping backwards for a moment she looked down at her stomach before stating a question. Do you think that if I was pregnant that you could have killed my kid like that? She asked, bluntly as Izuku coughed over the air. What kind of question is that? Izuku asked, comedically spitting blood. And as Izuku stared at her stomach in question, he found a fist-shaped impression over her stomach as he started to worry. But it was for naught as she simply held in a deep breath as it was replaced with her bulbous skin again. Now that is what I'm talking about. Show me more of your power. Boo called out, flying towards him again. Dodging each attack of the Majin, Izuku moved back and forth as he landed light but swift blows to certain parts of her body that caused her to look at them in confusion. Did you just hit my pressure points? She asked, as she felt her arms tingle in complete numbness. Yes, in order to have the upper hand in a fight against a powerful opponent you need to make any advantage you can. You never know when they might decide to end your life, Izuku said, as Boo nodded. Regaining her feeling in her arms, she flew back at the boy as this time they traded blows. And whilst her own blows were much harsher than his own, she did see how his martial arts were having clear advantages from her brawling. A punch to his face was deftly dodged as he sent a kick to her hip as she grabbed onto him and spun him around in the air and sent him flying upwards into the sky. As he caught himself with his floating ability, she started to send multiple ki blasts at him as he moved throughout the air as if he was a fighter pilot dodging gunfire and rockets. Eventually he made it towards her location as he activated his ki for the start of the battle as he landed his first decisive blow onto her as she coughed up spittle. He was in his emerald form. Izuku's emerald form had his entire body sheathed in an emerald glow as he stood still in front of her. And as she stepped back away from him, the emerald sheen had broken a part of the front of his body and face as it revealed his hair in a much spikier position. They were standing on end as they moved in wild directions and his eyes were much sharper than they were wide and expressive. His muscular body was much more pronounced as he had larger biceps and thighs, but the most important feature of his form was the fact that black sparks moved about his body as these ghosts floated around his body. One looked like a sickly old man who had green eyes and white hair. He was very lanky as well. The second one had magenta-colored hair, a scar covering the side of his face, and he looked militaristic in his clothing style. The third one was similar to the second except he had a more mysterious feel to him as he held a bandana over his forehead. The fourth was more akin to a hermit as he stood with a scar moving across his face from his forehead touching his hair down his face until it reached his lower cheekbone. The fifth one looked more akin to a random biker guy who wore a leather jacket as well as greaves on his ankles and wrists. He also was holding a Tommy gun over his back, scary. The sixth one was surprising one as he was seemingly wearing a jean jacket over his upper torso as it covered the lower part of his face as he held a blank expression. The only woman of the group stared at her with a happy smile on her face as she openly waved at Boo. She had been wearing a black jumpsuit with white gloves and boots, and she had long black flowing hair in a ponytail as she had a beauty mark just to the left of her lips. The final ghost was that of an overly muscular man who could give Roshi-sama's own muscular form a run for its money. He was taller than the rest, and completely towered over Izuku as the young boy only stood at the man's hips. He had golden yellow hair in the shape of a V at the front as he smiled down at her with such an intimidating aura that he outshined all the others except for Izuku. They all swirled around Izuku before creating a rainbow of colors that all moved into his body. His aura was also changing as well as it constantly changed colors between red, blue, pink, emerald green, black, magenta, and white. And not even a moment later her eyes started to see black as she felt the pain in her body then she could see what had happened. But as soon as she looked down, she found Izuku staring at her in front of her face. She literally saw that his own original emerald, green-colored eyes had become a literal rainbow of colors before she passed out. Izuku was not amused when he watched the female Majin Buu pass out in his arms. "I didn't even hit her. What did I do?" Izuku muttered to himself as the Majin just laid in his arms snuggling into his warmth. Izuku and the rest of his posse entered the spaceship gifted to them by Kaba as they prepared to leave planet Earth of Universe 6. Izuku had been training for the last few days with Buu as she had been showing a lot of promise with her different abilities within her repertoire of abilities. As they watched the beautiful blue ball of dirt and water slowly become smaller and smaller as they flew into the deep depths of space, they lightly trained with one another. It wasn't anything that would increase their gains faster than anything, it was to get a light sweat into their training. They didn't want to be blasted out into space considering the problems that would cause for the Saiyans minus Buu. Although the Majin had stated that she would absorb them in order to keep them safe before landing the remnants of the ship on another planet with intelligent life in order to fix it and spit them out. They were moving into the farther depths of the universe when out of the corner of the ship's view, it wasn't able to be seen or sensed by our protagonists, a ship had appeared. It looked ancient in nature as it had different kinds of blaster cannons on the lower portions of itself as it followed after the group. Izuku and the others though were unaware that they were being followed as they moved throughout the universe in search of whatever this new threat was. They had traveled to at least 25 planets now, and still hadn't found any evidence that this new threat to the universe was out there. Just small rumors of a powerful demon god that could cause even Lord Champa problems if he doesn't take him seriously. Stopping on planet Skrill, that was what the planet was called, yes. They let their ship refuel for some energy so they could continue their journey around the universe to protect its innocence. They decided to move into the town to see if they could get more information about this new threat as they watched multiple people in mercenary gear move throughout the streets. The group finally arrived at a bar, a place Izuku was well aware could give information so long as you paid well. Izuku sat down at one of the tables as he let the girls around himself sit down next to him to get something to eat since they ran out of food and supplies. A waiter moved to his table and with a gruff voice asked what they wanted for their lunch and if it was to go. "I would like the grilled pig if you have it," Izuku said, as the waiter nodded before looking at the women. "I would like anything sweet," Boo said, with a happy smile earning a small smirk from the waiter. "I would like any kind of meat you got," Caulifla said, in her arrogant voice. "I would like some salad," Kale said, quietly. With their choices made, the group looked around at the place as they sized each and every potential enemy up. There was a group of mercenaries that looked like heaters from Universe 7, but Izuku didn't want to assume. Then there was the leftover soldiers from Frost's pirate crew that had terrorized the universe. And finally, there was a weird group that seemed like they were a very provocative group of mercenaries. Once the waiter had arrived with their food and drinks, he left them with a small note on a paper asking that the girls meet him in the back. The girls stared at Izuku for a moment before tearing up the paper and destroying it in front of the waiter as he grunted and shrugged his shoulders. The squad of protectors had been keeping an eye on everything within the place when the waiter returned to bill them for their time. "That will be around 400 credits, the waiter said, as he looked emotionless. "If I give you some extra, could you tell me about this massive power within the universe?" Izuku asked as the waiter gained a very scared expression on his face. "You will need to double that amount if you want any answers from me," he said, as he glared into Izuku's eyes. The young Saiyan had placed a bag of 800 credits on the table as the waiter pulled a seat and sat down. "What do you wish to know?" the waiter asked, curious but paranoid. "We need to get a name, as well as how strong they are on a physical level," Izuku said, as the waiter nodded. "Well, from what I know, I heard that it was a magic-wielding frost demon. He was very ancient in terms of age, nearing the edge of his lifetime. His name is Yamuji, he hails from the same clan that Frost and his ancestors are from. We don't know where Yamuji is at the moment, but he is a very powerful individual who lives until this day, we just don't know where he is at currently," the waiter said, as Izuku thanked him for his information. As the squad of Izuku and his women got ready to leave the bar, they were met with the door opening as a tall frost demon entered the room. They looked at this frost demon with concern as well as curiosity as he stared at the entire room in a cold expression. Although when his crimson orbs looked at Izuku and his group he smirked slightly before walking over to the bar. He ordered some milk in order to be able to rest from his long journey in the universe. And once Izuku and his friends had left the building, he never noticed how the frost demon had glared at his back but felt it. They arrived at his ship as he found that it was sabotaged from how the ship had holes in the sides as well as concerning slash marks on the sides that tore through the hull. "Well, we need to get a new ship," Caulifla said, as Izuku inspected the ship further. "The slash marks are from that of a key-based attack, something sharp had to have broken through the hull. Even with its shields up at the time, the attack had to be stronger than the ship's hull and shields at the same time. Whoever broke our ship, they're good," Izuku said, as the group were suddenly teleported into a wasteland separated from one another. Izuku stood across from a well-armored opponent who had shown a massive bulk in musculature across their upper body and legs. Getting into a combat stance, Izuku had prepared for anything when the opponent had suddenly disappeared and reappeared behind himself. Raising his guard, Izuku blocked the attack before a kick landed on his crossed arms, launching him from the ground and into the air. He watched as the frost demon's hand had reached for him as he spun in the air and activated a key barrier around his body in order to prevent what it was doing. The frost demon itself glared at him as it gained a sadistic smile on their face before launching towards him with terrifying speed for Izuku's base form. Activating One for All, Izuku was able to keep up with their speed and keep up with them by throwing a sudden kick at their arm. Of course they blocked it, but that was what Izuku prepared for as he sent a punch at their chest whilst they were blocking his leg. As soon as his punch landed on the Frost Demon's chest, they were blasted back as they coughed slightly before chuckling. To think that the Saiyan that had defeated my cousin was this strong in base. You aren't using your full power right now, aren't you? The Frost Demon asked, smirking. No, your power doesn't scare me. If anything, it's just slightly larger than Frost's own, Izuku said, as he smirked at his opponent. Oh, you must be mistaken. My power is leagues above Frost's. How about I show you how much more powerful I am than my cousin? The Frost Demon called out, as he powered up to maximum and he began to mutate. As much as I would love to watch you transform and get stronger, I need to find my friends, Izuku said, disappearing from sight and landing a gut punch on his opponent, knocking them out. As they collapsed on the ground, Izuku looked back at them for a moment or two before nodding and flying away. On the other side of the planet, Boo was fighting her own opponent who had taken her by surprise, but she had quickly defeated them without trouble. The same was for Caulifla and Kale, who used their full base powers in order to defeat their opponents without issues. Once they met up within the wasteland that Izuku was at, they looked for the main problem that they would have. They felt a massive power moving towards them, but it wasn't the massive power that Murek had foretold them all about. Izuku stood in front of the girls as he glared at the new Frost Demon who had arrived in front of him with an arrogant smirk of his own. Who are you? I know that you are the Frost Demon from the bar back in town. Did you break my ship? Izuku questioned as the Frost Demon replied in a soft but regal tone. That was correct. I was the one who broke your ship. My name is Tenjira, and I am the leader of the Frost Demon group who work for Yamuji. But don't worry, I will see to it that you are all sent to Otherworld, Tenjira said, smirking evilly at them. Well, I hate to explain this to you, Tenjira, but your allies were incredibly weak compared to the power you wield. But that pales in comparison to the power that I gained in the Tournament of Power, Izuku said, as he looked at Tenjira. Oh, this is my final form at the moment. I still have 2 more transformations. What you see is just a mere 25% of my full power, Tenjira said, smirking at them before appearing in front of Caulifla and Kale and taking them both down with 1 hit each. So, you defeated Caulifla and Kale in their base forms. What makes you think you can beat me? Boo asked, as she glared at Tenjira. Oh, don't worry, you're next, Tenjira said, as he disappeared from his position and pierced her chest with his arm. He looked confused as he swore that he pierced through her heart and killed her when she started to wrap her body around him. Sorry for not telling you, sweetie, but my body is gelatinous. And I have no heart. You will have to destroy all of my atoms in order to kill me, Boo said, unwrapping herself from Tenjira and using her wrapped tail to launch him into a rock face. Izuku landed in front of the rock face that Tenjira was launched into as he got out of the rubble, clearing his shoulder pads from the rocks. Looking at the Frost Demon at the moment, he looked much taller up closely as he stood at a whopping 9 feet tall of pure muscle. It wasn't overwhelming muscle, just enough to show that he was very powerful and strong. His skin tone was a light purple with white shells around his wrists, calves, pecs, shoulder pads and head. He had an air of superiority as he glared at Izuku and Boo as the two looked at him unamused as he growled. Lucky shot, but that won't happen twice, Tenjira said, as he launched at Izuku. Too slow, Izuku said, as he moved out of the way and sent a kick to Tenjira's chest, sending him skidding backwards. How? Why, you're in your base form, Tenjira said, as he looked at Izuku in confusion. Oh, I should tell you that I am not using my full strength as well, like you already found out. But I will let you know this, I have at least 4. No, 5 forms after this, Izuku said, as his body started to glow with power. Green and teal lightning sparks had flowed around his body as he went to full power with his usage of One for All. I will use Second's power for this fight, Izuku thought to himself as he suddenly fizzled out of existence for both Boo and Tenjira. As both Boo and Tenjira had looked in all directions for Izuku's presence, he suddenly appeared in front of Tenjira with his fist deep into his gut. The Frost Demon was looking shocked at how Izuku pierced his guard that fast and hard without him noticing until now. And from this moment, He had only heard 2 words from Izuku's mouth that caused him to suddenly feel fear. Second gear. Izuku stated before he disappeared from sight and appeared behind Tanjiro and kicked him to the ground hard. As soon as the words second gear were uttered, Tanjiro immediately knew that this fight would not go the way he wanted. So as he was blasted away, he attempted to right himself before Izuku got into his guard again when he was suddenly kicked from behind back into the air. When he caught himself in the air, he decided that this fight was just not worth it as Izuku flew towards him as he attempted to flee from the situation. But before he could even get into the atmosphere to escape the young man, Izuku appeared in front of him and transformed into a Super Saiyan and kicked him to the ground once again. As soon as a crater was created from Tanjiro slamming into the ground, Izuku landed nearby as Tanjiro glared in his direction. He was getting more and more frustrated with how this Saiyan warrior was continuously getting in his way. Looking at the others nearby, he thrusted an arm out in an attempt to kill Caulifla and Kale who were watching from afar. But the blast couldn't even get a few feet away from him when Izuku stepped in its path and took the blast for them. Tanjiro didn't know how much power he placed in the blast, but he was celebrating in his head for finally killing Izuku. But his mental cheering had been brought to a heartbreaking stop when the smoke cleared up to reveal Izuku just not wearing a shirt anymore. Now he was feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time, and that was before he was punched with power far surpassing what the boy gave him earlier. True fear. If you want to escape, I apologize but I can't allow that to happen. You might clue in Yamuji that me and my allies are searching for him. Tanjiro, if you were a good person in this life I think we might have been friends. You were a great fight to have at the start, but you just became weaker as the fight went on. I hope you are reborn as a good guy in the future. Izuku said, as Tanjiro couldn't even get words out before he was completely obliterated from the known galaxy. On the other side of the universe, a man wearing garb fitting for a Supreme Kai had been meditating in the realm of the Demon Clan. He had pink skin as well as purple shining orbs on his shoulders where pointed daggers had been seen coming out of his back. His stature was much taller than that of our protagonist as he stood at a whopping 15 feet in height. His musculature was incredible, as it would make All Might cry in envy in terms of how well the man kept himself in his meditative stance. He felt the change in the energy within the universe as he let a small smirk enter his face before he stood up and walked over to the table where his allies were sitting. Hey Yamuji, it's been a while, what's on your mind this time? A woman asked, as she looked similar to the Saiyans. I'm fine, just noticed that Tanjiro has met his maker, do you want to know who managed to kill him? Yamuji questioned. Wait, Tanjiro was killed. He wasn't that particularly strong for our group, but he was a slippery bastard. Which was why you taking him in, right? The woman asked. No, I took him in because of the life he lived up until now. Because of our influence he got revenge on the people who had wronged him in the past. But now we have a new threat to our cause. Yamuji said, projecting an image of Tanjiro's last moment. They couldn't see the image clearly, but there was 2 things that the 2 beings noticed about the person who was about to kill Tanjiro. It was the fact that he had spiky messy hair that was standing out on all ends, as well as the fact he had emerald eyes to match the hair color. And his hair was yellow in color on the image they were being projected by Yamuji. Okay, so a Super Saiyan is killing our men. We're plenty stronger than Tanjiro though, I believe that we can kill this bastard if we run into him. The woman said, as Yamuji stared at the image a bit longer. I guess you're right Hestari. But that doesn't mean that I won't send out Frelardus towards his direction. I will inform him about his younger brother being killed. Yamuji said, walking away. Hestari watched as Yamuji walked away before she went back to eating her dinner as she thought about Izuku for a moment. He seems like the type who'd be shy around women. I am going to have a lot of fun with him if he crosses paths with me. Hestari thought as she giggled to herself. Izuku's power level is innumerable in this story since it's already reaching the godly terms for power itself. But since Toriyama had stated that Beerus was placed in the godly power scaling at a 10, Izuku in this story will be placed at around a 7. I'm not sure what scale Goku was in terms of comparison to Beerus, but if I can remember properly, he was placed at around I believe a 6. The same was done for Vegeta, so having Izuku be at a 7 at this point cause everything in the manga has been placed during the time skips that have been shown in this story. Now for those of you who are wanting new forms for Midoriya Izuku now that he is a full-blooded Saiyan. These are the forms he can currently use and some that he can access during this part of the story. Uzaru Alpha-powered, this form allows Izuku to contain the Blutz waves of a moon and transform into a giant green-furred ape. He supposedly loses all mental acuity with the form when he was first introduced to the form, but from training with Vegeta on Earth off-screen, he has fully mastered the state enough to utilize his quirk with it. It is a devastating combo. Super Saiyan 1 full power, this makes Izuku's body and power increase dramatically to the point that he looks somewhat like a younger All Might from America. Super Saiyan 2 full power, this will make Izuku's muscles sleeker and increase his power and speed by 2 times that of his full power Super Saiyan form. Although this form based on Gohan's usage of the form increases the ego of the person. Super Saiyan 3 full power, Izuku can access this form. He just prefers to not utilize it because of the massive energy drain. And before you say that he should have mastered it already, he did. It just consumes too much power for him to even handle it at his age. Super Saiyan God full power, this form allows him to access the power of the gods and makes him as strong as Goku was during the Tournament of Power when he fought Dispo in order to save Hit from being eliminated. Super Saiyan Teal full power, this form is a combination of 100% of his maximum ability to use One for All and combining its power with Super Saiyan Blue, changing his hair color from a bright lime green into a teal color. His power is nearing Jiren's full power form against Mui Goku in the Tournament of Power, but because he's been training on the side, it may have gotten more powerful. Those are the forms he has attained through hard work and dedication to his training. Even with days off he still increases his power level through resting on days where he'd normally train non-stop until he gets exhausted. But these are the forms that come after all the power he has attained. He will still use the weaker Super Saiyan forms, just at different times when they are useful. But here are the forms that Izuku doesn't have access to but will attain them at some point in the future. Super Saiyan Uzaru Alpha-powered, Super Saiyan version of Uzaru and OFA-powered. So not much change except for Izuku needing to force his will on his giant ape transformation. Super Saiyan 4 combined with OFA, this form is hundreds of times stronger than the great ape transformations with OFA powering them up even more. This form takes on certain features of the Uzaru form and places the fur on the user's arms and wrists. Their tail becomes thicker and can be used for attacks at much higher speeds than normal. Super Saiyan 4 Super Full Power, the Super Full Power version of SS4 not much changes except surpassing the current limit of Super Saiyan 4 combined with OFA. Black Whip Armored Super Saiyan 4. Black Whip covering most of the Super Saiyan 4's body in order to prevent exhaustion from taking over the body and forces it to fight. Just slightly stronger due to another power's presence within Midoriya's body. This specimen within Universe 6 is the weaker version of Golden Frieza who had been capable of attaining a new form. But went about it in a different way. His death will be at the hands of Izuku like usual in his attempts to stop the destruction of the universe as a whole with his adventure. But this isn't about our resident cinnamon roll. Frelardus is taller than Izuku by at least 2 feet and towers over him. He has shoulder pauldrons that stretch out by about a foot in length that are blue in color when he's in base form, and the gem in the middle is black in color, the same for the other gems on his body. Frelardus sounds similar to Master Roshi from the anime, but he is younger, and his voice is scratchier in tone alone. Frelardus does indeed have a long tail that extends about 2 feet out behind him in length. His facial expression will always remain neutral, but when he gets stressed, he will become more and more panicked and attempt to end any fight he's in as fast as possible. In terms of his aura for how he powers up, it will be white in color when in base form before it will change to a dark chrome color when he enters his transformed state, something that I will keep protected from the readers until he decides to transform. His personality will actually be more akin to Bakugo Katsuki's attitude when it comes to fighting. He will be a very good martial artist who will want to win at any cost. Anything is permitted in his eyes, ranging from throwing sand in someone's eyes, to getting a cheap shot on someone if it means he will win. And he will get plenty of cheap shots on Izuku before he begins to use his full power, or at least a good sizable chunk of it. Now for how his personality and ideals will clash with Izuku. The Saiyan boy will be more likely to clash with him due to how similar he'd sound to Bakugo through his mannerisms, as he would wish to fight Izuku as much as possible and couldn't care less about his younger brother being killed. But when the two meet for the first time, it will be a standoff like in a cowboy movie, as the two stand across from one another with some wind blowing by, with Izuku's shirt and pants fluttering in the wind, same with Izuku's hair. But by the time they will fight, it will be so fast that those who are with Izuku will need to be in Super Saiyan to actually keep up with him and Frelardus. Alright, now to the meat and potatoes between Izuku and Frelardus in terms of their power levels. In the previous author note, I had made Izuku be ranked as a 7 on the godly scale between Beerus and Goku in terms of their godly presence in the god scale of power levels. Since power levels can't be counted in Dragon Ball Super, aside from the god scale, Frelardus will have the upper hand at first as he shows off his power in base. When Izuku transforms into Super Saiyan 2, he will be pushing Frelardus to going all out in his new transformation that he'd gotten off screen before he even met Izuku. And this form will cause Frelardus to become much taller in height, his muscular anatomy will become denser as well as pronounced, and his head will gain a similar crest on it like Cooler from the Cooler movie against Super Saiyan Goku on Earth. His power will be much higher than Izuku using Super Saiyan 2, but all Izuku would need to do is combine his quirk of One for All with Super Saiyan 2 in order to defeat Frelardus. After that, he would make sure that the evil enemy wouldn't come back and kill him before he could inform his allies about his incoming demise. Frelardus's boss will not have been able to tell him about his younger brother's death in time and will be meeting Izuku for the first time on that said planet, and by the time their first encounter is over he will have received information about his brother's demise from Izuku. That will spark Frelardus wanting to fight Izuku for having defeated his younger brother in battle, and his battle lust will have him fight Izuku. After leaving the planet where they had met Tenjira and fought the Frost Demon, Izuku and company had decided to ultimately head to a different planet in order to continue their search for their villain. Izuku kept to himself during this time as he trained with Majin Buu as well as Caulifla and Kale in a bid to increase their overall power level for opponents who might overwhelm them in power in the future. Izuku himself, however, was more focused on mastering his new form that he'd attained in the Tournament of Power, as it had shown that he needed a lot more experience as well as stamina to hold it for longer periods of time. So as the ship blasted through space, we find Izuku dodging and countering many attacks sent to him by Buu, Caulifla and Kale as they were at full power in both their base and normal full power. The young man was increasing his strength in base, from which would increase his full power in all his transformations. He knew that there would be a new transformation for him in the event that he reaches the threshold that was required for him to attain it. He wasn't someone who could master his own movement or increase his power so that he could have a thrill of a good fight. No, he just wanted to end any and all suffering that happened around himself. And he wasn't afraid to make sure that whoever he fought didn't come back from the dead in an attempt to kill him and those he began to show some kind of love towards. Damn it, just stop dodging, Caulifla growled as she transformed into a Super Saiyan as she attacked Izuku in her growing annoyance. If you really want to land a hit on me, you should really make sure that you don't break our main mode of transportation, Izuku said, dodging each and every attack that Caulifla threw. Well, why are you always training? Kale asked, as she came in with a kick from behind. Because I need to be prepared for any opponent we come across. If I'm not ready for it, then we might die. I'm not looking to die on a battlefield right now. I want to save people and make sure that they don't have to live with the fear of God putting pressure on them, Izuku said, as he dodged another swipe from Kale and Caulifla and sent a kick into both of their stomachs, causing them to fall back. Well, I think you should at least rest, Izuku. We've been training ever since we left that last planet against Tenjira, Buu said, as she landed behind him. Izuku grabbed her blue arm as he tossed her over his shoulder and slammed her, admittedly softly, into the metallic ground of the ship as she groaned. Looking at all three women inside the ship, Izuku couldn't help but chuckle at the fact that they were groaning in slight pain from his training as he walked over to a side of the ship and pulled out some food items. He figured it was time to get a break as he prepared some food for them all in the event that they were close to a nearby planet to resupply their food and supplies. Sometimes he cursed his new Saiyan biology as it had him eat a lot of food in order to keep him full and ready to fight anyone. But the amount of food that would cause him to become broke was kind of ridiculous when it came to choosing what kinds of food he needed to eat in order to fully satiate himself. As soon as he began cooking the food and the aroma of it was wafting through the entire ship, the others he was training with immediately sat at the table as he chuckled in amusement. Kale and Caulifla were animatedly talking to one another about how good his food was, whilst Boo was just watching him cook, and that was before all three women took note of something behind Izuku that was swishing and swinging back and forth. Before Caulifla and Kale knew it, they were entranced by the moving object on Izuku's rear as they watched it move back and forth and miss the chairs that were just behind Izuku as in a moment of pure adorableness and complete idiocy, the two Saiyan women jumped at his tail. Almost as soon as they grabbed at his tail in a bid to at least touch the fur on the tail itself, they were immediately noticed and the tail moved out of the way from their reach as they jumped around again in a bid to grab the offending limb. Izuku however remained focused on his task, completely ignoring the two women vying for his tail's attention. Boo however had spoken up to Izuku about the whole situation between him and his tail that the other girls never really talked about to him. "So, when were you going to tell us you had a tail?" Boo asked. "Tail? Oh right, my Saiyan tail. I just appeared in Universe 7 with it when I was brought there via a portal from my dimension that I originate from. I think that when I looked at the first Saiyan that I saw within Universe 7 as a whole, my body started to reconstruct itself through making me a half Saiyan at first. Then Whis turned me into a full-blooded Saiyan, just so that I can find new ways to power up," Izuku said, as his tail moved out of the way of the two Saiyan women on the ship. "Damn it, why don't we girls have tails? This is bullshit," Caulifla called out, sitting down as Kale continued to chase his tail like a kitten would their parent. Well, Universe 7 had female Saiyans who were able to have tails. I personally think that Universe 6's Saiyans evolved to never have a tail and that increased your overall power in that department," Izuku said, as Caulifla thought about it. I wonder why we don't have tails anymore," Caulifla mumbled to herself before Kale finally let out a happy mewl. "Finally, I got it," she called out, petting the fluffy tail. As she started to move her hand all over Izuku's tail, the young man tried to hold it in as much as he could. But when a girl whose chest was being hidden by her shirt that apparently hid its true size from any and all would-be perverts, he was beginning to feel aroused by his tail being petted and groomed. And unknown to any of the women on the ship, the tail had slowly become more and more relaxed as well as began to wag slightly in arousal, the women blissfully unaware of what they were doing to their mate. Izuku however was trying to finish lunch as fast as possible because he could feel the tent being made in his pants from this kind of menstruation. "Oh god damn it," Izuku mumbled to himself. After that whole debacle, and Izuku placing his tail around his waist once more, he began to look out the window of the ship as he looked at the many different planets surrounding them in the vast expanse of the universe he was now a part of. He couldn't help but smile at the many distant worlds that he could explore, his inner child wishing for adventure, the adventure he couldn't have when he was younger and back in his world. He shook his head at that, not wanting to relive old memories that he used to share with those of Earth in this universe before the planet apparently became uninhabited because of wars. He saw a planet that appeared to be the same coloring as Earth, and he ultimately decided to go and check it out. Using the ship's flying consoles, he flew the ship through the planet's atmosphere and was close to landing it on the ground nearby when he noticed movement from the forest nearby. Landing the ship just out of sight, Izuku went to the lowering door as he opened it to see if the world had a breathable atmosphere. Once he managed to get some oxygen into his lungs, he nodded to himself as he left the ship and the women on it in an attempt to check the place out, as well as find out whoever was watching their arrival from the planet's surface when he was still flying the ship. A few minutes into checking the planet's surface and Izuku was already enjoying the lush greenery as well as the planet's vibe of serene calmness. He was feeling the planet's energy as well as the animals and natives who lived here in harmony with the planet itself. That was all before he came across something he'd never seen before as he stared at a clearing from the forest. Deep in the clearing, there was a massive group of people doing some mining for some apparent reason, and from what Izuku could sense about the place, the planet clearly didn't like it from how its energy felt about this. Moving down through the clearing, Izuku found himself staring at the natives of the planet moving around the place, chains holding them to the ground as well as tethering them to each other. Izuku continued to explore the place as the natives took note of his presence, and it was at this opportune time that Izuku felt the planet's energy move something and cause one of her own inhabitants to stumble, allowing him to show kindness to her people. It was a child who had dark red hair and skin coloring of greenish blue in hue, as they were looking as though they hadn't been sleeping in months. "Hey, are you all right?" Izuku asked, helping the inhabitant up. Thank you sir. But I think I should get back to work," the child said, as Izuku looked at the others. They were looking at him with slight fear, but at the same time, they held the same look that Eri had when he saved her from Shisaki. The look of pleading for help, and as Izuku felt anger at the fact that literal children were being forced to work here as beeps, he felt a presence appear behind himself. The person landed on the ground behind himself as they towered over him by at least 2 more feet than his 5 feet 5. They glared down at him with an unknown fury as well as confusion at his presence that he immediately placed up his guard when looking at this person. They were another frost demon. But from the energy he could feel from this guy, Izuku knew that this one was many times stronger than Tenjiro was entirely. "So Saiyan, can you please tell me what brings you to my planet?" the frost demon asked, curiously. "I would like to know why you are condoning beepery on this planet. Last time I checked it was illegal to own beeps." Izuku growled as the frost demon let out a huff. "This planet's inhabitants attacked me. All I did was give out punishment for defeating their planet's strongest fighter. I gave them a deal that if I were able to defeat their strongest warrior, they would have to do something for me," the frost demon said, as Izuku glared at him harder. "You are aware that I can sense your power, right? There's no way that someone on this planet was strong enough to hurt you, much less pose a challenge to you," Izuku said, as the frost demon just chuckled. "You were right about that, but I gave them a chance to see if they could send me away from this planet. They failed, and this is the result. I only came to this planet to get some resources so that I can build up my army further than it currently is," the frost demon said, as he looked at the mines. Izuku watched the frost demon's body language, and he could easily tell that they were attempting to try and get him to leave the planet without inciting a fight. This guy was pretty smart in terms of being coy as well as giving off lies, but Izuku did find at least one truth in his words. He did fight a strong warrior on the planet, and instead of defeating them, the frost demon killed them instead as a message. Then there was the power he was sensing from this demonic being. They were hiding their power behind a transformation that lowered his overall power level. And Izuku sighed to himself as he mentally questioned the vestiges. "Okay, lay it on me, how strong is this guy really?" Izuku asked, as he kept his eye on the frost demon. "Well, I'd have to say at your full power, he wouldn't stand a chance. But if he transformed into his transformation that he's clearly masking, he'd be at least around a quarter of your full strength with one for all," Yoichi replied, as Izuku gave a nod. "Okay, so do you guys approve of me just ending this guy's life? Because I seriously abhor beepery," Izuku mentally questioned. "Just make sure that you don't get the planet destroyed," Gudo replied as Izuku gave one last firm nod. "All right, I will fight this guy. But not right now. I will need Caulifla and Kale to move all the natives away from the area," Izuku thought to himself before walking away from the site. "Thank you for exploring the planet. I will be sure to be gone in the next few days," the frost demon said, as he got back to work before receiving a call. Izuku made his way back to the ship as he found the girls stretching their limbs outside of it as he walked up to them. By the time he got to them, the trio were worried about the expression he held on to his face as he was audibly growling to no one in particular. They went to ask what was wrong before he activated his quirk and slammed his fist into the ground as he held his fury on the ground for that particular moment as his aura was slowly changing colors. It went from teal, to black, to blue and yellow gold, all before landing on red and indigo blue. "I need you two to get the inhabitants of the planet out of the minds of this world," Izuku said, as he angrily looked out into the distance. "What, why?" Caulifla asked. "Because they are being treated as beeps," Izuku growled. "Okay. Anything else you'd like us to do?" Kale asked, as Izuku looked at her. "Make sure that they are as far away from the mines and my fight as possible," Izuku said, as the girls nodded and took off in that direction. So, who is this guy we need to fight? Boo asked. I don't know his name, but all I know, he's doing despicable things to children, and I cannot allow that. Izuku growled out. Back at the mines, the Frost Demon picked up his communicator before answering the call from the only man in the universe that he'd willingly take orders from. As soon as the holographic projector showed the man covered in robes blocking him from view, he heard the man speak. Frelardus, I have contacted you with urgent news. The man said, as the now named Frelardus replied. What is it? He questioned, looking over his beeps. There has been a development in the universe. Your brother, Tenjira, has been killed. Sources say that he was killed by a Saiyan who bears the resemblance to a 16-year-old boy, and who has freckles on his cheeks resembling a diamond. As well as green eyes and green and black hair, his emotions should be through the roof. I thought I should inform you that this boy had killed your younger brother. The man said, before turning off the communications. Frelardus glared at the device before it creaked before breaking in his grip. His power was flowing off his form in waves, as his facial expression was bordering on rage as he glared in the direction Izuku had left him earlier before he slammed a fist into the ground. The natives immediately left the area he was at and went straight to work, hoping that whoever pissed him off wouldn't piss him off any longer, as they didn't wish to be whipped or defiled. When I get my hands on you, Saiyan brat, I will make sure that your mother wishes she'd never given birth to you because she was a whore. Frelardus growled angrily and floated up into the sky. Now if I were a Saiyan brat, where would I be? Frelardus questioned quietly. That was before he noticed a familiar colored aura coming towards him at high speed. He chuckled to himself as he began to laugh hysterically. Instead of leaving the planet, he comes right back to me. I will make sure that he regrets his decision. Frelardus yelled before blasting off towards the incoming energy. Meanwhile on the ground, two women came out of the brush and began to dismantle his operations all under his nose. Frelardus and Izuku charged one another in the sky. Izuku pulled an arm back as Frelardus did the same, both holding fury in their features as their auras blasted out as both of their fists collided with one another in the sky, causing everything around themselves to come apart from the planet. The ground as well as the trees that were deeply rooted inside the ground were pulled and rooted out from the planet itself as they blasted around the sky as they launched different attacks that were physical in nature at one another. Izuku spun around in the sky as he activated One for All at his maximum output and used Black Whip and Smokescreen in an attempt to take down his enemy quickly. Frelardus for his part had shown that he was surprised by the vastly different techniques that Izuku was using, but he pushed it aside as he used his pure power to try and pull Black Whip off of his arm as he was yanked through the sky. He was pulled towards Izuku as the young man flew through the air as he glared into Frelardus's deep dark brownish blue eyes. The Frost Demon had been blasted to him with such speed that the Frost Demon couldn't react in time as Izuku slammed his fist into the demon's gut, causing an indentation to appear from the backside of his body as he coughed up spittle. Izuku then tossed Frelardus into the air as he then sent a kick into his face, before spinning in the air as he turned Black Whip into sharp tendrils that made him into a spinning top in the air. Frelardus for his part had managed to regain his bearings as Izuku came spinning towards him at extremely high speeds and blocked the attack with his arms as a very loud grinding sound was heard from the two. Izuku then stopped spinning as Frelardus had pulled an arm back in an attempt to feint him out for his attack before Izuku sent Black Whip out and grabbed his tail, which was slowly making its way up to grab Izuku by the throat. If you think that you can use something like a tail to help in your fight, then you are sorely mistaken. Izuku said, before sending a combo attack of Detroit smashes and a final street Lewis smash into Frelardus. Damn you! Frelardus screamed as he fell into the planet's surface. Izuku flew down to the planet as he made to continue his assault on the villain for such a thing like Beepri. But as soon as he made it to the ground area where Frelardus was supposed to be, he was jumped by Frelardus, who had thrown dirt into his face, causing him to yelp and cover his eyes immediately. As he tried to get the dirt out of his eyes as much as he could without hurting them entirely, Frelardus had entered a combat stance and threw a wild haymaker at Izuku's back, sending him into the dirt. He then walked over to Izuku as he grabbed the boy's head and began to squeeze as hard as he could, before a green and black tail grabbed onto his wrist and squeezed, somehow, harder, forcing him to drop Izuku to the ground as Ferlardus hissed in slight pain. To think that I have been having trouble with you. I will have you pay with blood for what you did to my younger brother. Ferlardus growled. You will pay for having forced a planet's inhabitants into unwanted Bipri. Izuku growled out as he attacked Ferlardus as the demon reciprocated. Over with Caulifla and Kale, the two were clearing the mines as fast as they could. They could hear the sounds of battle in the distance, not to mention watching as a large portion of the planet's surface be completely swiped away from the ground from just one of their clashes. The two women immediately broke as many chains as possible and sent the inhabitants to the forest nearby so that they could escape the area. Kale, however, was sensing something wrong with Ferlardus's energy as it was fluctuating the entire time as he fought Izuku. Sis, I think Izuku's in trouble, Kale said, as Caulifla looked at her. What are you talking about? Izuku's been holding back against him, Caulifla said, as Kale shook her head. He's using his human power. I'm not sure if he can combine his human power with Super Saiyan. We've never fought him with the form he said he has, Kale retorted as Caulifla growled under her breath. He is okay, but we need to finish our task. He's holding back because of those in the area, Caulifla said, getting back to work. I hope you're right, sis, Kale mumbled as she assisted as much as possible. Off on another mountain watching over the fight between Izuku and Ferlardus, Boo was watching with a growing blush on her face. She was also eating popcorn at the moment as she watched the fight pick up pace, and she couldn't help but let out a beep of excitement as she watched Izuku slowly increasing his overall power. He's started to get warmed up. I wonder if he will reveal something new, Boo asked, before she heard movement near her. Turning her hand into a key blade, she pointed it in the direction of the incoming opponent, but was surprised at who had come to the planet to see her. It's you, she said, as she held a shocked expression over her face. We have a lot to talk about, a familiar voice said. Back with Izuku and Ferlardus, the two had their hands in one another's grips as they growled at one another high in the sky. Electricity was sparking between the two's bodies, although Izuku's was from his quirk, and Ferlardus's was from their clash in the moment. Izuku began to increase the power he was holding as his aura went from a normal emerald green into a teal one. His hair was also slowly changing colors to a teal green color as he slightly grew a couple inches, with his musculature becoming more apparent. Ferlardus did the same as his power increased and his aura changed from its abnormal white coloring and changed to a chrome look, and he couldn't help but chuckle at Izuku as he was the first to push him this far aside from his boss. Their power continued to increase until it reached a fever pitch, and their area in the sky suddenly combusted, leaving a dust cloud as Ferlardus smirked at Izuku through the smoke itself before their power sent the dust and debris away. I have to say, the power you are displaying is very good. I can see how you killed my baby brother, Ferlardus said, as he chuckled. I thought you were pissed about how I killed him, Izuku questioned, preparing for an attack. Well, that is still something that I'm pissed about. I was hoping to kill the bastard myself. But you took my chance away from me. Now I have to kill you in vengeance for stealing my kill. And I know just the way to do it, Ferlardus said, entering a powering up stance as his aura became larger. Oh yeah, what's stopping me from actually interrupting your transformation? Izuku growled as he prepared to attack. The simple fact that if you don't, well, I will simply destroy the planet with you along with it, Ferlardus said, as Izuku growled in anger. If you think you can destroy the planet before I can send the attack back at you, then you think I'm pretty slow, Izuku quipped as the frost demon chuckled. Oh, I am much stronger than I showed you. I am holding back my full power, so if you wish to fight me at full strength, you'll allow me to go full power, Ferlardus said, as Izuku glared at him. Do I have much choice? Izuku growled back at him. No, but it's better this way, Ferlardus said, as he growled. The air around Ferlardus had slowly began to rumble and shake as Izuku just continued to watch the frost demon in front of him with a bored expression. Ferlardus then began to pull all the power that was escaping his body, and it slowly was gaining chrome features all over his body. His deep brownish blue eyes were slowly transforming into a black color as he smirked at Izuku. That was when Izuku noticed that the demon was slowly increasing in height as well. Hyaaarrg, Ferlardus called out, as his upper body increased in height and musculature. After that, the head crest on his head began to resemble that of a triceratops on Earth. Two horns, however, were just pointing outward from his body as his black eyes suddenly took over the eyes as a whole before he stood over Izuku at least by 2 whole meters. He chuckled when he saw Izuku's completely bewildered expression before becoming confused as the boy brought out a literal notebook and began to write something inside of it. He decided to humor the boy and just float there as he finished his transformation as he stood over the air as it trembled to his sheer power that he was releasing just from floating around. This is the power that I was referring to. This is what I call chromatic Phrolardus, Phrolardus said, as he smirked at Izuku. Huh, does everyone just use their names after a transformation they achieve? Izuku muttered. What? Phrolardus asked, completely bewildered by the boy's question. Just before he was punched in the face, Phrolardus blocked a punch with his tail as he saw the boy in front of him was now millimeters in front of his face as he let out a bark of laughter. He then removed his tail and began to bring the fight to Izuku as he sent a punch into the boy's diaphragm, sending him into the planet's surface and creating a new canyon. Flying down to the ground where Izuku was crawling out of the canyon, he glared at Phrolardus as the demon had landed in front of him before flying faster than Izuku did at first and through the wall of the canyon as he opened it up even more as lava began to cover the ground floor at the bottom of the canyon itself. Phrolardus then gained a smirk on his face before leading Izuku into the lava as the boy created a key barrier around his body to protect him from the lava. Phrolardus slammed him into the lava as a whole, creating a chasm with the lava falling even deeper into the canyon before Izuku floated out of the crater at the bottom of the chasm itself. Phrolardus smirked at Izuku as he prepared to fly at Izuku, but for some reason he noticed the boy simply disappear from view for all but a second but felt something smash right into his cheek, forcing his head to the side slightly. He glanced over at Izuku, who had his fist out and a bored expression on his face before he suddenly disappeared from sight again. Phrolardus tried to anticipate where the boy would come by turning around and swiping at nothing before. He felt himself be kicked right in the back of his left knee, forcing him to fall down to a knee before he felt a foot slam right into his chest, sending him into the ground. As he slid across the planet's surface, he couldn't help but smirk as the thrill of the battle was getting to him. This boy was showing him power that his baby brother couldn't hope to achieve in the next 1,000 years. Well, I believe it's finally time for you to take this fight seriously. I would rather not kill you when you're not at full power. Phrolardus said, as he grinned at Izuku. What makes you think that I have forms after base? Izuku asked, as he hopped on one foot before cracking his neck. The simple fact that you are able to keep up with my chromatic form with seemingly absolute ease. Phrolardus said, as Izuku felt the energies of Boo, Caulifla and Kale. You know what, I think now is a good time to transform as well. Izuku said, as he entered a stance. Ha! Izuku growled as his power increased. Placing his hands and arms at his hips, his aura blasted out from his body as he charged as much as possible. His musculature was fully developed now as he slowly gained a few more inches whilst also looking pretty slim for his musculature as a 17-year-old boy. His aura though was what caused Phrolardus to pause for a moment as it seemed fiery in nature as it flowed from his body. Electricity of both green and blue nature started to sporadically flow around him as he slowly caused the planet to shake from the sheer power he held as well. Ho ho ho, ominous, Phrolardus called out, as he entered a combat stance. Har rrg, hyaaaaaaaaa. Izuku called out, as his eyes finally glowed a dark teal color. Somehow some dust and debris had blocked Phrolardus from viewing Izuku as the boy floated in the air not too far away from him. Using his own aura to blast the debris and smoke away so he could take in how strong his opponent looked, Phrolardus could only look on in shock as the boy's body was more on guard. His body was chiseled as if he were cut from marble itself. His tail however had a teal color to it and it sporadically swished behind him, a show of emotion that was going through the boy's mind. Phrolardus smirked at Izuku as the boy entered a combat stance and the frost demon couldn't help but feel as though something was wrong with the boy in front of him. He was too calm, collected and way too serene. Before Phrolardus could even register what had happened next, he felt more than see the punch that landed in his gut, causing him to fold over Izuku's arm as the boy glared into his eyes with a silent fury behind them as a whole. Once Ferlardus slowly stumbled backwards and held onto his stomach, he threw up his innards as blood and bile came out of his throat and it tasted like metal. Looking down at his stomach, Ferlardus could only stare on in disbelief as his chromatic form had shown cracks on the outer layer of his form's stomach lining. Looking back up at Izuku, he could only see that the boy was just getting started. "You wanted to see some of my power. Well, here it is," Izuku said, throwing a fist at the frost demon's face. Izuku slammed his fist into Ferlardus's face as it sent the villain tumbling across the ground. As the villain ragdolled around the planet, Izuku appeared behind him as he kicked the villain to the air as the alien monster had started to flail about before catching himself and stopping his ascent. He glared down at Izuku as the young man was now zooming up to him with his increased speed as well as power, and Ferlardus powered himself up to the maximum output he could use. Ferlardus threw a right hook as Izuku lowered his head just a bit before throwing his arm out and slamming his fist into Ferlardus's cheek, causing him to lean a bit to the right from his head and neck. Izuku smirked at Ferlardus before grabbing the demon's arm and tossing him into the air before placing two arms around his left leg and pulling him through the air, with him increasing his speed by activating his ki. As the two zoomed through the sky, Ferlardus comedically screamed as they moved about the skies with such speed. Goku and Vegeta had felt as though their fused counterpart of Vegeta was offended. And as he brought the villain closer and closer to the ground, he finally let go of the villain and launched him straight into the planet's crust, causing a massive plume of smoke to cover his vision. Izuku remained floating over the planet as he stared down at Ferlardus, and he felt as though that it was taking the frost demon too long in order to come out. So he flew into the smoke as he found Ferlardus stumbling about as his chrome form was literally peeling off and away from his body as a whole. Smirking at the easy win, Izuku walked over at Ferlardus as the villain had turned to face him with a very exhausted glare as he rushed at the vastly more powerful opponent. He threw a fist that could have caused someone who was far weaker than Izuku to be confused, but Izuku caught the attack without even flinching. He then squeezed his palm as it held the fist inside as Izuku pulled the villain up close to him as he gave the villain a very sadistic smirk on his face before kicking the villain high into the air. Ferlardus's vision was slowly gaining black spots, before he shook his head and stopped his ascent into the air. Looking down at Izuku from above, Ferlardus decided to use the last of his energy in a last-ditch effort of an attack in a bid to finally kill him, unaware that his chrome form had already lost all the power it had. He pulled an arm back as he charged a full-power energy blast that was slowly gaining its size behind him as Izuku looked up at him with a bored expression on his face, and that was before he put his arms into a charging position in front of his body. "You may have bested me in physical combat, but my power knows no limits." "Full power," Ferlardus called out, as a massive ball of energy gathered behind him. "So that's what you call a full-power blast in your final form? That's chump change to what I've gone up against," Izuku mumbled, as he charged his attack. As the two were gathering their energies into their palms, Caulifla and Kale had finally arrived at the battlefield with Boo, who was looking worse for wear. When asked why she was there and what happened, she told them to just ignore how she looks and just watch the fight. And the trio watched as Izuku manhandled Ferlardus before sending him high into the air as the frost demon charged up his energy in the sky as Izuku did the same from the ground. "Oh gosh, we're finally going to see Izuku use one of his ki blast attacks. I wonder if it's similar to Goku and Gohan's attacks from the Tournament of Power." Caulifla questioned as she watched Izuku. "Well, let's hope he doesn't hurt himself more than he already has." Kale replied as Boo chuckled. "If he hurts himself from this fight, I will heal his damage. I do have magic after all," Boo said, as the two Saiyan females just stared at her. "You can use magic?" Caulifla asked, awe in her expression. "Of course I do. I was literally made from magic," Boo said, pouting. "Well, we should focus on the two beams preparing to attack one another," Kale said, as all three looked at the beams beginning to head into the sky. Izuku was on the ground as he stared at Ferlardus with a complete bored expression on his face. As he charged his attack, he decided to not make it full power so that he could have Ferlardus gain some kind of hope to win this kind of fight. Izuku, he really wanted a good fight since Boo and she had been training before she met him. He preferred to be fighting a magical being and not a Frieza look-alike, since they were using quite literally the same moves as the bastard. If anything, Izuku's mind was focusing back on what he would be doing to pay back the girls for allowing him to fight this threat alone without being interrupted. Full power. Supernova of Taro. Ferlardus said, as his supernova had gone from somewhat small to gigantic in size. Wow, you really put a lot of power into that attack. Izuku mumbled, before shooting his own blast. Emerald Flasher. Izuku muttered. A small green blast moved swiftly towards the slow-moving supernova. Caulifla and Kale were surprised by how small the beam was before it slammed into the ball of energy that Ferlardus had, and they watched as it slowly pushed back the massive ball of flaming rock and energy. Ferlardus, however, pushed as hard as he could and noticed the beam slowly being overwhelmed by his overall power as he smirked and began to gloat about his surefire victory. Izuku got a bit angered at how Ferlardus was already celebrating his win against Izuku before he pushed a tiny bit more to push back the giant ball of energy that Izuku was pretty sure that was around 98% sure he could fly around and use his afterimage to keep the blast going. Thinking about it, he decided to give some power to his afterimage and just flew around the blast faster than Ferlardus could detect and stopped behind him. He floated there for a few minutes as he watched the sweat fall down Ferlardus in treasure droves. It was doing a lot for him to hold the gigantic ball of energy there whilst his afterimage just blasted away. Floating just close enough that he would not trigger the danger sense in his opponent, Izuku pulled an arm back before keeping an eye on his opponent, who had begun to laugh out loud again as his ball of energy started to overwhelm his afterimage. Take that, you filthy monkey. You will regret the day you faced off against Ferlardus of the Yamuji pirates. Ferlardus cackled, before something pierced through his chest. You should have really learned how to sense energy, pal. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been sporting a nice little hole in your chest. Izuku said, before pulling his arm out from Ferlardus's chest. The frost demon could only watch on in sheer surprise and shock before the afterimage of Izuku had pushed more power into their attack, forcing the gigantic ball of energy back at Ferlardus. Before Ferlardus could even react, even with his damaged and beaten body, the gigantic ball of energy consumed him entirely as it was blasted out towards the cosmos of Universe 6 and straight towards the sun. Izuku watched as the gigantic ball of energy exploded far off into the distance before he spoke one last time towards no one in particular. That's 2 down, an untold amount left to go. In another room within the area where Yamuji was last seen talking to one of his subordinates, an oracle was sitting looking into their glass ball. Their face hidden in the darkness of the room as they opened an eye out before looking through the crystal ball. Lightning flashed in the room as the person's face was revealed to all those who had read to this point. Underneath the cloak was a feminine visage as the person looked through the crystal ball with what appeared to be a hope-filled awe on their facial features. She smiled into the crystal ball before looking towards where Yamuji was currently speaking to his subordinates within his merry crew of pirates. He never paid her any thought until he felt the presence of those who worked under him disappear. But something was off this time. He didn't come to her seeking guidance on who was supposedly coming after him. He sat there in his seat in the middle of the room with nothing written on his face. No emotion was revealed to her as she looked at him from her small room given to her through forced labor. She growled under her breath before she pulled the hood of her cloak off her head, revealing beautiful purple and pink hair as she shuddered from the looks of the many men in the room. I swear, if that kid is still out there, I need to get his help, the woman said, as her slightly dull purple eyes glared into the crystal ball. Finding out that she was an oracle in this world was surprising to her for sure. Especially so after the whole explosion back on Earth that was dealt to her by Redacted, but whatever. Her new mission was to find this boy and make sure that he's safe from any and all enemies he comes across, even if it kills her. Although, she will be killing them before they can even get the chance. She isn't an assassin for no reason. On a far distant world to where Izuku and the others were located, a man stood over a battlefield of corpses. He had been staring off into the distance as he'd felt the slow descent of Ferlardus's energy dissipating until it completely disappeared. He growled to himself as he thought about the person who had apparently taken down one of his best men in his entire group of pirates. Stepping over a couple of bodies, he pulled the arm of one of them off before placing it over a fire as he grabbed a communicator from his pocket. He had heard it going off a few minutes prior to him destroying this entire planet's self-defense force. He chuckled when the person who answered was the beauty who he had come to know as someone who could actually come close to killing him in his sleep. Yamuji, I believe we need to rethink our plans of universal domination. The fact that this Super Saiyan had defeated Frelardus is concerning. We need to take this guy down. Hestari called out from her end of the communicator. We will continue with the current plan. If we just so happen to come across this boy, we will make sure that he is dealt with. Yamuji said, as he shook his head. Sir, I think this is a poor decision to make. Hestari warned. Sure, but it's mine to make. If we end up suffering for this choice, then we will take responsibility. Yamuji quipped, as he prepared to turn off the comms. Are you sure that you should be saying that? You still haven't taken responsibility when it came to our child a decade ago. Hestari said, slightly worried. No, Yamuji chuckled, before ending the whole communication. Because I can feel the presence of the boy coming to me. Yamuji said, looking to the sky. Opening square bracket closing square bracket opening square bracket closing square bracket opening square bracket closing square bracket. Izuku and company were on their way to the nearest planet. It just so happened that Izuku took note of how there didn't seem to be any kind of energies that he could sense on the planet itself. He was worried for the fact that this planet was seemingly uninhabited since there didn't seem to be anyone who lived on the planet itself. Once the ship landed on the planet, they got off of the ship itself as they took in their surroundings. The planet had large gusts of wind that moved tumbleweeds around the place as Izuku sensed around the place for any energies that were still around. As he took glances around the place and searched for any surviving energies on the planet itself, he couldn't help but feel as though there was something off about this place. He couldn't put any words to it, but for some reason the planet itself was giving him a vibe that it wasn't safe at all. Even the Saiyan instincts that he'd relied on for a while now was telling him to leave as fast as possible. Glancing at Caulifla, Kale and Boo, he found that they were feeling the same way as he was since their guards were high right now since they were taking in their surroundings as well. As they traversed the area, Izuku had already placed the ship in a small capsule to protect it when they landed and gotten out of it. They continued to search the area for any signs of life before they came across what appeared to be a battlefield with someone standing at the top of what appeared to be a throne of bodies. Walking closer to the individual, Izuku felt as though all the strange feelings of danger was erupting from the man who stood up there. Cautiously everyone walked closer to the person at the top of the hill as they heard the sound of mouth smacking. Immediately Caulifla was confused as there didn't seem to be any food around here. By the time they reached the top of the body pile, they found a man who appeared to be Saiyan in terms of his looks. Although humans appeared to look similar to Saiyans in the 6th universe as well, considering the fact that the U6 Saiyans don't have tails. They stared at the man as he was shown to be eating a cooked limb from one of the people who were laying on the ground around them, all causing Izuku to feel sick to his stomach. This man was not someone who was kind towards others, and from what he could see, this man was more dangerous than they all were at the moment, and he couldn't hold back a grimace as the man looked at them. And the cold expression on the man's face as he stared at them all caused Izuku to mentally and physically tense up. He finished eating the limb he'd cooked before standing upright and walked to them all as they took a subconscious step backwards from the man as he stopped in front of Izuku. The two stared at one another and Izuku took in his appearance. The man was easily 2x taller than him and his musculature was far more than his was. It was as though he were looking at another All Might in terms of how the man carried himself to Izuku, and then he lowered himself to be near Izuku's height. "I know what you did, boy," the man growled out, as Izuku just looked confused. "What are you talking about?" Izuku asked, unaware of who this man was. "You have done nothing but show your power to everyone, but you haven't done any feats that make me think that you could be a threat to my cause. My oracle foretold me about my demise against a Super Saiyan who appeared to look far more primal than that of which I am seeing from you," the man said, as Izuku slowly let his words sink in. "Who are you, and how do you know me and everyone here?" Izuku asked, completely neutral in his tone. "I am the one you are searching for. I am the original Saiyan." "Yamuji," the man said, introducing himself. Before Izuku could let this information sink in, Yamuji had immediately sent a kick at Izuku, blasting him down from the top of the body pile. As Izuku tumbled across the bodies of the pile he'd been walking up on, he slowly got back up as he stared at the incoming Yamuji who had been quickly descending towards him. Izuku immediately tossed the capsule holding the ship inside and made sure that it was nearby as she had rushed towards the capsule itself to prevent it from being lost. When that was done, Izuku was grabbed by the face and blasted away into the distance with a loud explosion going off as Caulifla and Kale watched on in horror. They'd never seen Izuku be manhandled like that so easily. It was as though he wasn't prepared for this fight at all. But as soon as the man, Yamuji if he called himself correctly, began to turn and look at them, Izuku had come back, sending Yamuji into another building that just so happened to be nearby. He glanced at the girls and gave them a grim nod as he rushed to keep the fight on himself and not those around himself as Yamuji rushed back at him before clashing in the middle of the battlefield, creating a massive shockwave. Izuku was currently using all the power he could in base form with One for All. And to see that Yamuji was actually standing up to him without the usage of the other quirks was something he really appreciated. This would be the first time he'd fight someone who could handle his full strength. And as he increased his power, Yamuji seemingly did the same, albeit very slowly, as their battle encroached on Boo and the others who were setting the ship up to escape this place. Izuku felt the power of Yamuji, and he knew for a fact that this guy was far stronger than Ferlardus and Tenjira combined. If anything, he felt as though that this guy was far stronger than most of the people in the Tournament of Power. Aside from Jiren. As Izuku threw out a punch towards Yamuji, the man effortlessly caught his hand and began to grip it tightly in his palm. And as Izuku smirked at the man, he seemingly looked confused, before a black tendril erupted from Izuku's entire arm and wrapped around the man, and Izuku lifted the man into the air before slamming him onto the ground multiple times around himself. By the time Yamuji had exploded out of the black tendrils, he rushed in, thinking that they were only to keep him at range, and like an idiot was caught off guard again when Izuku suddenly disappeared from sight and reappeared in front of him. The young Saiyan had slammed a fist into Yamuji's gut as hard as he could in base, but the man just stared at Izuku, as though he hadn't hit the man hard enough to hurt him. "You know, the fact that you're holding back against me, it's really pissing me off." Yamuji growled out as Izuku scoffed. "The fact that you're saying that to me is hypocritical. I'm holding back because I'm testing you out, seeing how I compare to you, especially with how all these people who informed me about you and your crew, they state that you're powerful enough to give Lord Champa a run for his money. Not that I blame them, the bastard doesn't even train." Izuku grumbled as Yamuji actually chuckled. "That fatso doesn't even know how to train. How he became a god of destruction is beyond me, but right now, all I want to do is kill you," Yamuji said, before powering up to his maximum power in base form. "So this is your maximum in base, right? You're still hiding your true power, but I'm doing the same anyway," Izuku retorted as he powered up to match. The two stared at one another for a few moments as Yamuji watched as Izuku made certain movements with his limbs as though he were ringing them around. Izuku didn't really notice Yamuji paying special attention to his legs, but the man took note of how they were glowing an ominous red color and was preparing for it. Izuku immediately rushed the man whilst pushing F-Age into the maximum as he blasted himself to Yamuji. The two met in the middle of the field once more as their clash rocked the planet itself. Izuku had sent a horizontal kick to Yamuji, who had blocked it with his arm as the Saiyan had smirked at him. Grabbing hold of Izuku's leg, he pulled the boy close before grabbing onto his face and slamming the boy into the ground as it broke apart around the two of them. Pulling Izuku out of the ground, he never made a sound or grunt of pain as the man continuously slammed him into the ground around himself before kicking him high into the air. Izuku stopped himself from flying further away as he wiped some blood coming out of the side of his lips as he smirked before launching back down at Yamuji. Even if the guy is evil, Izuku knew that this could be a good lesson to learn from fighting someone like Yamuji. The two continued to fight one another as their speed and power increased. Eventually Izuku was pushed into his Super Saiyan form as Yamuji powered up to match him in every way as the two moved across the planet itself, sending powerful blows to one another. When they returned back to the main battlefield, they both were panting, although Yamuji was panting way less than Izuku was as lightning sparked around his form. He had been pushed into Super Saiyan 2 with 1 for all mixed in, and he was struggling to keep up with Yamuji, something he hadn't gotten from previous fights. As he stretched himself in front of his opponent, the original Saiyan Yamuji just glared at him with utter confusion. Izuku, whilst stretching his limbs, took off his shirt, revealing a very scarred and bruised form before he began to power up to his maximum power output. The ground shattered around him, creating spiderweb cracks in it as they moved closer and closer to Yamuji, who was looking at the boy with a new expression, excitement. It appeared as though the man's hatred for the boy was replaced with intrigue and interest as he watched Izuku powering up. His muscles began to atrophy and increase in size, his hair began to stand on end. His eyes were changing from an emerald, teal color to a complete teal color. Lightning sparks continuously sparked around him as his power soared high into the realm of the gods, and he stared at Yamuji's expression as a smirk came on the man's face. He met Izuku's powering up with one of his own as a red fiery aura covered his entire body before he transformed into what Izuku came to know as the Super Saiyan God form. Confused initially by Yamuji's decision to use that form, he mentally thought nothing of it before finishing his transformation. Screaming out to the heavens above, he finished his transformation as Black Whip covered his entire body. Float activated almost subconsciously as he floated in the air as danger sense was brought out to the highest degree of usage. Smoke was billowing off his form in pink gusts, and finally his entire form had a red glow to it. Lightning sparked around him as Yamuji had rushed him first this time, and Izuku rushed back at the man as they clashed their fists. As soon as their clash began, they teleported across the planet as they bounced everywhere and slammed their own attacks into one another as hard as they could. Izuku sent a feint kick at Yamuji, who went to catch the offending limb before feeling a fist smashing right into his left cheek. He let out a guttural growl before Izuku double axe slammed his head, forcing him to fall into the ground as Izuku then pointed his hands at the Yamuji-sized hole. As his palms began to glow an ominous yellow color, Yamuji immediately began to fly upwards before he heard Izuku call out his new ki blast attack that was coming for him. Hell's Flash! Izuku screamed as he blasted the hole. Putting up a barrier, Yamuji had covered himself as his shield became engulfed in the yellow glow of the beam. From outside the crust of the planet, multiple beams of energy had blasted out from all around Izuku, but never hitting the boy as he glared down at the hole in front of himself. He searched for the energy of Yamuji, knowing that the Saiyan warrior wouldn't allow himself to be killed like that, and as he continuously searched for the man's ki, he didn't find it until it was too late. As soon as he felt the energy of Yamuji behind himself, along with danger sense warning him of a lethal attack coming in from behind, Izuku moved as fast as he could to dodge this new attack. As he turned around, he found Yamuji holding a ki blade on his arm, his entire form only slightly singed before pushing his arm towards the boy. The blade and time was moving in slow motion as Izuku moved to the right as he now faced Yamuji, and before he could fully dodge, the man had slammed his ki blade in an downward arc. Izuku didn't feel it, but it was more the fact that he couldn't actually feel the injury happen as he was more focused on kicking the man away from himself and moving to make some distance with him and Yamuji himself. Izuku heard the sound of something hitting the ground nearby, and slowly turned his head to see what it was. And as he looked to his left, he found that two things weren't what they appeared to be. The first was that across the field from where he had once stood, a part of the arm that should be on his shoulder was on the ground. The second part was that at the shoulder, Izuku noticed a glaring lack of an arm on his torso as he placed his right hand over the burnt wound as Yamuji began to chuckle at Izuku's predicament. Hee ha, ha 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 ha. Hey, has somebody seen my arm? You can't miss it, it's peach. Yamuji full belly laughed. Grr, why if I had a moment, I'd do something that Vegeta would do. But I'm not even going to entertain the idea, Izuku said, as he grunted and moved himself to float high into the air. Oh, and where do you think you're going? Yamuji questioned, his laughter stopped. Oh, just places, Izuku said, as he panted heavily. Like that mountain over there? Yamuji asked, curiously. That looks more like a plateau, Izuku went to correct, before he was punched so hard that he smashed right into it whilst screaming the word plateau. Well, now that that's over, Yamuji went to speak before he felt something slam into his face. The attack sent him flying across the planet before slamming into a few mountains as Caulifla and Kale helped Izuku out of the rubble. The young Saiyan was not looking very good as he coughed slightly from the dust entering his mouth and throat, and with that the two women had got onto the ship that was floating in the sky thanks to Boo. Once inside, the ship had closed its hatch and flown out of the planet's airspace and waited in space itself as Majin Buu had exited the ship and glared down at the planet itself. She lifted an arm into the air creating a massive ball of energy, and as it grew larger and larger, she reached the maximum she could make it before throwing it at the planet. There's no way he could survive a planetary explosion, Boo reasoned before getting into the ship and flying off. Meanwhile on the planet itself, Yamuji pulled himself out of the wreckage of mountains as he glared at the incoming ball of energy. He smirked at it before he spoke. "Clever boy," he growled, before launching a powerful beam to stop it from destroying the planet, ironically saving it. "Next stop, beginning my search for that boy. He's survived my first encounter with him. Nobody survives a first encounter with me." Yamuji growled. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.